Hello, Sunil. Are you there?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Hello.
Sir,
Sunil,
shall
I'm
we
not.
start?
Hello. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir. You're audible. It's just a little bit disturbance at first.
So I think you started recording, right? And
Yes, I have started the recording.
and
Even
the
live streaming.
YouTube live stream, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just take out the. Is there any disturbance? I mean, crackling noise. It was there in the morning. Just take it out.
Shall I present my screen, sir, so that we can start?
Yes, present your screen.
Shripa, sir,
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
could you please stop for a few minutes sharing your screen so that we'll just start with the brief introduction of this course, and
Yeah,
then
no.
we'll have a session.
Sure. I'm stopping.
Thank you, sir. Ambode, sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Yes.
Shall we start?
We have another 2 minutes time. Just a minute. Let me check. So far, there are, including all of us, there are 33 participants. Okay. Shall we wait, Sripad and Harsha? Another couple of minutes time?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible and there is no disturbance, right? Okay.
Yes, sir. You are
Good.
audible.
Yeah, I think good to go. Well, thank you all for joining the session. So first of all, I would like to thank you all and would like to welcome in fourth edition of International Conference on Communication and Information Computing Technology, ICT 2021. This is industry-sponsored track number 3 on cloud computing, and this is sponsored by Barclays. we would like to thank Barclays for sponsoring this track. We have the speakers of the session, Harsha Yale, Head of Adoption, Cloud Adoption at Barclays, and Sripad Shukla, Enterprise Architect, Cloud Architect at Barclays. Well, so let me introduce Harsha Yale. Harsha Yale is responsible for cloud adoption across markets, along with the transformation and strategy for trade management and middle office technology in the corporate and investment banking division of Barclays. Harsha has spent the last 25 years dabbling in the technology of the with the last 16 years at Barclays and 7 years at Deutsche Bank prior to that. He has played various roles like developer, architect, platform owner, global head, regional head of technology, program director across the multiple regions. So, welcome, Harsha. Thank you. Let me introduce our next speaker, Sripad Shukla. He is an enterprise cloud architect in applied research and development, Barclays, CPO with a focus on application of distributed ledger technology to digital money. He has 20 plus years of technology experience with the last 13 years at Barclays. He has worked in the payment system technology as a solution architect at Barclays, helping team migrate to the cloud and a product consultant at Infosys Financial. Thank you, Sripad, for joining the session. I would like to welcome you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I may request to our speakers to kindly take over the session. Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Sripad, would you mind sharing your screen?
Yep. Just a second. Is it visible, Harsha?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking the host in having us here today. It is a great honor and pleasure to be here. The one thing that I would like to say before we start is that all the views that we expressed today, both myself and Sripad, are our own. Right? We do not represent Barclays here today or its position. Well, if you think about cloud, just think about the number of jobs that are available. If you Google it today, you'll probably find about, upwards of 100,000 jobs available, right? Just like I just Googled this morning, and there are probably about 20,000 jobs in the UK, about 50,000 jobs in the US, and probably, as I was saying, a couple of 100,000 jobs all across the world, right? And that's quite a humongous number, given that cloud is still in its nascent stages. If we go back, 15 years, people didn't talk much about cloud, right? There wasn't. In fact, like Amazon was one of the first players who announced cloud in 2006, public cloud, but recently people have been using it for a while, right? The other point I would like to make is, if you look at the enterprise landscape today, you think that about 10 to 15% of public cloud infrastructure is on cloud. So you put 2 and 2 together, right? We are a long way in kind of like to that end goal. Can you imagine how many jobs will be out there, right? So cloud is a very, very exciting place to be today. And in terms of career opportunity, it is immense, right? That's the point I would like to make. So today we will be talking about cloud in financial services. We'll kind of like go through what we mean by cloud. This particular tutorial is designed such that like nobody needs to have any prerequisite knowledge of cloud. So we'll try and keep our best to kind of keep the topic as generic as possible so that everybody can understand and everybody can participate. We expect this to be as interactive as possible, given the constraints of the number of participants that we have here today, as well as the kind of the platform itself. However, there are opportunities to ask questions both in the Q&A as well as you can raise your hand, and so that the coordinator can put you off mute and you can ask those questions. So with that, we will look at what is cloud, what it means to different people. Because there are lots of jargons out there, right? So it can be intimidating for somebody who is not familiar with cloud and who suddenly comes into it and all these jargons are thrown about, and kind of very easy to get intimidated. So hopefully we'll walk you through those, some of these jargons, busting those myths and realities as we go through. We'll also look at features and benefits of cloud, why it makes sense or why it doesn't make sense in certain scenarios to go into cloud. Equally, we'll look at some of the characteristics of financial services. And what we'll try and do is bring in our experiences, of going through this cloud journey. We are all students of the cloud, so we don't profess to be experts. Right? We're continuously learning, like all of you. Right? So kind of as we learn through, we'll kind of share those experiences that we've had and try to relate some of these myths and realities that are out there to the experiences that we've had, and kind of give our views and thoughts on that. And finally, we'll look at maybe what can be done if you're coming in new in order to get up to speed or get into the world of cloud, and how you can start your journey if you're not. I know that a lot of you probably are very familiar with cloud. I don't know if in the curriculum cloud is already introduced, but I know given that many of the projects that you guys probably are working on are already on cloud and you are experts. So feel free to pitch in and make the conversation as colorful as possible. Okay, with that, let's move on to the next slide, please, Sripat. I think Ambawadi sir did a great job at introducing us. So just to say a few words in our own words, my name is Harsha Ele. I run cloud adoption for the markets technology. So basically trying to help applications get onto cloud, kind of make that journey so much easier rather than everybody reinvent the wheel, right? So apart from that, I also look after strategy and transformation for middle office. That's my current role. I've been in this role probably about 2 years. Prior to that, I used to run trade capital technology for the macro business. And prior to that, I used to work in Singapore for facing off the business as global regional head of technology in Singapore. Prior to this, I used to work in Deutsche Bank for about 7 years in various different roles. So on the whole, probably about 20, 25 years in technology. I've done various different kinds of roles, as Ambawadi sir mentioned. The key point is, 3 years back, I didn't know much about cloud, right? I got introduced to it. I got excited about it. Created myself a free account that AWS offered, and kind of started dabbling in it. The point I'm trying to make is, you don't really need to be a technologist. I know that most of the people on this particular seminar are technologists, but even if you're not, it doesn't matter. Cloud is a great equalizer, so to say. Right? So anybody can learn it. And in fact, if you go to look at Cloud Guru, which is one of the really, really popular platforms for learning, that is run by somebody who is not a technologist. He used to be an immigration lawyer in his prior life before getting introduced to cloud and becoming an expert in cloud, and now he teaches the world cloud. So it's there's always a point where you can start getting into cloud, and it's if you can overcome the initial jargons, overcome the initial hurdles, so to say, you can become an expert. You can become that, aspire to have a job in the cloud. Very much. With that, let me hand over to my co-host today, Sripat, to introduce himself.
Hi, thanks, Harsha. So as Ambavade sir said, I'm an enterprise architect in applied R&D in the Barclays Chief Technology Office. So current focus is digital money. That's an area of active research for us. And prior to this, I used to work as a enterprise architect and solution architect in the Barclays payments technology teams. I was there for quite a while. And before that, again, just continuing with the theme of finance and payments, I was a product consultant at Infosys in the Finacle product division, as it was known at that time. Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey. I think I got started on cloud maybe roughly the same time, 3 or 4 years back. Probably even before Barclays started looking at cloud seriously. And it's been an exciting journey, and I think there's still a lot to learn uh, for all of us. Uh, so that's it, Harsha. I'll hand back over to you. And I'll just, if you can give me a second, I'll just go on mute so you can carry on the rest of it.
Yeah, it is an interesting landscape, right? It's continuously changing, and every day there's something new to learn. So absolutely, all of us are on this journey, learning journey. And hopefully, by the end of this conversation, we'll have all of you excited to start your journeys and aspire to be in the world of cloud. Because the world is going towards cloud, isn't it? Like, if you can think of it, no new project that starts can start without thinking about where it's hosted. And, and eventually the answer comes down to cloud, one way or the other, whether it be private cloud, public cloud, right? Yeah, let's go on. Okay, couple of housekeeping rules, right? We'd greatly appreciate if you avoid Barclays specific questions. Of course, you can quiz us on our experiences like working in Barclays. But otherwise, no topic is off limits. So feel free. We'll try our level best to answer the questions that you pose. But in case that we don't know the answers or we can't answer the particular question, we'll let you know. And if we don't know the answer to it and we think that it's not specific to Barclays, we'll definitely take it away. And via the various forums, we can communicate the answers back to you guys. As we said, all of the participants are on mute today. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. There's a button which you can use to raise your hand. And the coordinator will take you off mute and you can ask your question. Or you can, on an ongoing basis, like we have a chat session going on. I think Ambavade sir said good afternoon and I replied saying good afternoon to everyone. So you can definitely use that provision to ask any questions. So we'll try our best to as we speak, keep looking at the chats and the questions that are coming about. And, we'll try and answer them on the chats, but we equally, one of us will read out the question and so that we can make a debate out of this. So the way we kind of run this session is a couple of sections will run it individually and the others will kind of ask questions of each other and try and answer them, make it more interactive. So it's a bit interesting. It's a 3.5 hour session. So let's see how we go about making sure that it remains interesting and the level of participation can be high. In terms of breaks, I'll let Sripat talk about it as to how many exact breaks we have and how we'll go about handling the breaks. But given this is an interactive session and it's recorded as well, you should always be able to go and look back if you miss any particular pieces. So Sripat, can you please let the audience know whether we actually do break?
Yeah, we have 2 breaks of 10 minutes each. So roughly a third of the way through the session, and in most cases they are after the Q&A slots as well. So you'll have a good break from us just talking on.
It's like there is an airplane flying over your eyes.
Yeah. Just go on mute again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Shall we move to the next slide, please? So as I was telling, we kind of go through a few different topics. We'll start with what is a cloud, overview of cloud, the features, and the benefits that cloud provides. Maybe even look at like the different migration steps, the migration paths one can take. So there is no one path that everybody takes, right? And there is no one right answer for everyone either. So it kind of depends on your organization, the situation you're in, the project that you're running, your finances, lots of different things come together. Also, like, the equally like what kind of technology, legacy technology that you already have. All those things like feed into like your decisions on what kind of path you take to cloud. And we'll also look at like the characteristics of financial services, like, given that both I and Shripad come from the financial services background, and our journeys through cloud and through our careers have been in the financial industry. And I know that like there's a lot of keen interest among the student community to get into financial services, kind of look at like some of those characteristics, and also talk about how these characteristics like lend itself to a technology infrastructure in cloud, which greatly benefits the business. So we'll look at that. And as the topic says, right, like, so we are looking at the myths and realities of cloud and financial services, but in general, cloud itself, right? So we'll go through a few of them. We have picked a few topics. There is like the subject is vast and humongous, but we have picked a few key topics that we think are makes a lot of sense, and we'll go through some of those myths and topics. Enablers, of course, we look at like, what would make a cloud journey more effective and efficient, and there are few levers those levers would be. Finally, like if you're getting in new, like what are some of the things that you could be doing in order to get yourself started on the cloud journey? That is the last call to action. Q&A, as we said, we've kind of kept a few slots in between after each section, so that like, we can have a dedicated Q&A session. But equally, I encourage all of you to like kind of type in the questions as they come to your mind in the chat session. I would encourage you guys to like try it out by saying hello or hi, so that you know how to use the chat function. Let me start by saying hello, everyone. Shripad, do you mind like testing it out as well? Thank you, Ambavade sir. And participants, please feel free to type. Okay, it's definitely many people saying hello. Nice to see so many hellos coming through. The wonders of technology, like when Shripad has to like exercise some of the he cannot share the screen. So Shripad, if you don't mind sharing the screen again, please. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so with that, let's dive in. Okay. All right, if we take a step back and think about what is cloud, right? So before we go into that, like I'd like to give credit to our colleagues in Amazon AWS. This is a taken from them. I thought it was a very simple way of describing what cloud is. Equally, like, if you go to Google, like, you'll get a very similar-ish definition. But essentially what it means is, right? So when we talk about resources, we are talking about compute, the resources in the compute world, of course, whether it be like storage, whether it be memory, whether it be compute itself. This is the on-demand availability of resources and services across globally, right? Where you want it, when you want it, what kind you want, how much you want, right? And the most important factor about public cloud, this is true for majority of the public cloud vendors, it is pay as you go. So you pay only for the services that you use. If you use, an EC2 box in AWS, you pay for only that hour. So that you use the compute resources for as long as you need, and you pay only for that particular period of time, right? So it makes it especially if you worked in a traditional, infrastructure kind of environment, you know that when you need a box or when you need a server, it could take anywhere between 3 to 6 months. That has been the experience for the last probably 15, 20 years, right? It means like you start off a project, you kind of start thinking about like how many users you have for this particular project or this business function. Like the biggest challenge used to be like figuring that out. If you got that wrong, it used to be a heavy price to pay, right? What I mean by that is millions of users, the happy situation, right? Where you have lots and lots of users that, there's a lot of demand for your service. And so you kind of go look at like, okay, let's look at the size of the technology infrastructure that we need, how many computers, how many servers we need, and you buy all these servers in the past, right? And by the time you buy it, like, especially if you're in an enterprise, you go through all the different approvals, and the stacks are installed and the software is installed. It could be easily 3 to 6 months. The beauty of public cloud is it's agile and nimble. You get it when you want it, right? Nowadays, like with a click of a button or like running of a script, your server is up and running with the software that you need. That is where the agility comes from. And as I was talking about like capacity management, in the past, like, in our situation or scenario where you had these hundreds of thousands of users, world, you'd be stuck with all these resources and not knowing what to do with it, right? Whereas in cloud, in public cloud scenario, you just switch it off and say that like, thank you very much. We have tried, it didn't work. We stopped. So there is no ongoing costs for these. And given that like you pay per use, you haven't even paid like the original costs of having all this software. So it's agile and nimble that way. Elastic, as we said, like you can always start small, right? And as you grow, you can kind of expand that and say that like, as you see that more and more users are coming on board to use your service, you can say that like you can scale either horizontally or vertically. Today, you might have started with like a 32 core machine, and like, you might say that you have so much demand and the computer is going through the roof. You can easily like scale that up vertically. Or equally, you can say like, if you've designed your application in a fashion such that it lends itself for horizontal scaling, you can spin up more boxes, right? So that elasticity like is made available to you. So by the click of a button, you can either scale up or scale horizontally. And equally, like the other concept of being global, right? So today, you're sitting in India, like you're launching your service, but you know that like most of the demand for your service is going to come from the Americas. In the traditional world, what we would have done is like gone to a data center provider in America and kind of started off like setting up our infrastructure there. However, in cloud, like, it's like majority of the cloud providers are global in nature. They provide like, different regions and different, even within different countries, like large countries like the US or Brazil, you have different regions within the countries, right? So you can choose based on where you think your demand is going to come from, choose to like host your services wherever you want. And you can change that at any given point, right? Without too much effort. And also regulations are a key thing. You might have like all your services hosted in one country, but if your users are coming in from a particular country, that country might have certain regulations that say that it has to be hosted there. Very easily, you can go to like that particular country and host your services from that country. And as we said, the cost, beautiful, pay as you go. If you're not using it, don't pay for it. So it makes it so much easier to kind of budget for infrastructure and scale based on that budget. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to let you know that your audio was, at times just breaking up a bit. But yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, is it? Okay, all right, yeah. Not sure if you moved the slide to the next one. Okay, thank you very much. As we said, like, just reiterating our definition, it's on-demand delivery of compute power, database, storage, memory, and those kind of services, pay as you go model. So now we look at like, what is the different jargons that keep getting thrown up, right? Like, so there is like different flavors of cloud as well, depending on infrastructure as a service is one of the most common types of cloud offerings that are there, right? Basically, what it means is, in very simple terms, this is compute infrastructure being offered as a service, rather than you buy a computer and put it under your desk or put it in your own data center. The public cloud provider provides whatever compute that you need in whatever specification that you need. Of course, the price that you pay per hour or per minute per second differs on the capacity of the compute that you request for. So that is pretty much it. You want like X amount of compute power, you want memory, you want storage. The hardware basically is kind of virtualized for you, right? So it's made available on demand for you. The public cloud provider provides the infrastructure as a service. And you can spin this up and down, like the control given to you is very granular. You can spin this up and down on demand, and you pay for only, of course, when you use it and how much you use. That is, in a nutshell, infrastructure as a services. Straight off the bat, you think of a project, you think of a particular service, you can go to one of these public cloud providers, sign up with them, specify what compute power you need, spin that up. Within like a couple of hours, you're all set to go, right? Contrast that to like the old world, which would take like anywhere between 3 to 6 months, if you're lucky, right? And as we talked about, the whole capacity management becomes so much simpler. You can always start small, and scale as you grow. The next incarnation is platform as a service, right? So if you take the evolution of infrastructure, like what next? You need certain services, like databases is a very good example. Like majority of the IT functions that we write, like will in some form or way like interact with data, and that data needs to be stored. So we need some kind of a database, whether it's be relational. Nowadays, a lot of the newer projects are going for NoSQL databases, different flavors of databases, right? Like it's a good example. In the old world, what would we do? We would go buy a server. Of course, like, first we need to figure out what's the size of the server, and then kind of install one of these database softwares. Depending on the need that you have, you go for an Oracle SQL Server or a NoSQL database, and you install that software. Before you even do that, like, of course, you have to install the operating system, do all of that, right? And on an ongoing basis, you are responsible for not just the the schema and the data, but also the database software, the underlying operating software, and the underlying hardware. In the previous section, we saw infrastructure as a service. The hardware, of course, you have outsourced it to the public cloud provider to take care of. Now here, so you managing that particular database software, the public cloud provider offers different services where, like, whether if you want, you just have to specify what is the flavor of database you need, and the public cloud provider will give you that service, that database as a service, right? So most of it is bundled with licenses as well. So as you pay for your infrastructure use, you also pay for licenses, and it's kind of chopped up, right? You don't have to buy and commit. However, like they also, some of them also offer like bring your own license. So if you already have licenses, that can be ported as well. But the key point is, instead of you and kind of like ensuring that it works, and like, all the good things about how you kind of back up all that things are taken care by the platform provider now. Relational database service is a very, very good example from Amazon, which provides you this service. Like this, you can think of lots of different things, right? Like wherever there is a need, like the provider gives the platform as a service. If we take it to the next level, right? The next evolution of this, software as a service, right? Now, instead of like, let's think that you're you have a company. Now that you kind of go from getting the hardware, procuring the hardware, installing the operating system, installing the data, accounting software, and kind of managing that, to outsourcing the whole thing, right? So, like SAP is a very good example, or Zoho is another good example, where this service is provided. You just pick the modules that you want. I want an accounting module, I want a payroll module, I want an XYZ module, and the software provider, gives it as a service to you. You don't have to worry about the hardware. You don't have to worry about the operating system. You don't worry about the database. You don't even worry about the software itself and the maintenance of the software, right? So you worry only about using the software and the data within. And most of these guys, like, and not most of them, but all of them nowadays, provide like a ring fence service, so that there is no leakage between you and other customers. So you will get a view that you are the only person using the software or the hardware or the platform. Whereas in reality, a lot of these things are shared. But like with the, private virtual networks, like they kind of influence what goes in and Shripad, anything to add, or shall I continue? You're on mute, Shripad.
Yeah, Harsha, let me just quickly check. So, Ambawade sir or Sunil sir, I mean, are you also getting some break in
yes,
when Harsha is speaking? Or?
Actually, we are getting some kind of like a little bit digital bumps at Harsha sir's side.
Okay. Yep. No, no problem, Harsha. I just wanted to double check. Yeah, I think from if I just the only thing I could maybe add over here is very popular example when we try to explain this concept is to use a pizza. An IaaS is where you have your own kitchen, your own oven. You get the dough, you bake the pizza. SaaS is where you get a ready-made pizza, called Domino's. PaaS is a bit more difficult to explain using this. Domino's is not going to let me go there and bake a pizza. But I do remember, for example, my grandmom, she would prepare, dough for the cookies and take it to a baker and give him the dough, and he would then do the entire baking. So that's, what SaaS would best be like. And okay, I don't know how to extend that analogy to hybrid or multi-cloud, but yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
No, that's a very good analogy. Shrikant, thanks for that. Yeah, right from you order your pizza and the pizza gets delivered to you. That's the right extreme of software as a service. So having your own kitchen, having your own oven, I mean that can be extended to any end, right? Like
Yeah.
to the other extreme of doing everything yourself. A good one. I hadn't thought of a pizza like that. And restaurants where like they or hiring a restaurant where they provide like the dining in services, and you bring your own food and serve it there. Oh, nice. I think the disturbance, I'm not sure whether it's because of the internet being a little bit unstable.
Probably.
But let's see. Maybe you can try and take over to that.
Sorry,
Okay.
could you repeat?
I said if the disturbance gets too much, like maybe you can take over. And then I'll go check on my internet to see if it.
Sure. I'll just
me
go back on mute. Yep.
Okay, now we have been talking about public cloud, but there is more to it, right? Like there's more to cloud than just public cloud. The strategies for different organizations can be different based on like where they are, how big they are, the scale of the organization, and things like this. So we said it makes a lot of sense like for people to use public cloud, but equally like there is a growing need as well as aspiration from some of the large organizations to build their own cloud infrastructure, right? Historically, like every organization had would go to a data center, hire some data center space and things like that, and manage it. But now, like very similar to public cloud infrastructure, like large organizations have started building private cloud. That is what, when we talk about, when people talk about hybrid cloud, that's what they're referring to. A combination of the organization's own private cloud, or organization's own on-prem infrastructure, combined with a third-party public cloud provider, a vendor provider, right? Using all this infrastructure together in a hybrid manner is what we call as hybrid cloud. And if you think about why hybrid cloud, why people go for hybrid cloud, it could be various reasons, right? So there are legacy workloads is a very good example. You could have a mainframe, in-house mainframe, which normally doesn't lend itself to like, be hosted on a public cloud infrastructure. And some of these machines have been running for 20, 30 years in banks nowadays, or like even in other organizations, not just banks, right? So those things, like it's not A, worth the money to migrate them, B, very complex, nobody understands, right? So it's best left where it is. And the other is like, third-party workloads. So we kind of have third-party software, which may need, again, legacy software, which may need certain types of hardware, which has been running for a number of years. And data affinity is another one. Like when we talked about the legacy workloads and legacy software, there would be the other applications which kind of interact with these legacy software are kind of tied in, right? Like, so there's large amount of data being transferred between these applications. And it doesn't make sense to like split the load between on-prem services and public cloud services. Most of the time, like, this data transfer is happening over WAN. It kind of like introduces latency, but also it can be expensive when you move data in and out of public cloud. Even though most public cloud providers don't charge you for putting data in, they definitely charge you for taking data out. So you got to be cognizant of that. And lastly, cost, right? I know that we'll go through a little bit of this in detail when we talk about myths and realities, where in general, it should be cost effective and efficient to run things on public cloud. But there are certain situations and scenarios where running it in-house will be a lot cheaper than running it on cloud. A good example is when you have to run things 24/7, when you have certain softwares where you have enterprise licenses, which is already paid for and it's a sunk cost and things like that. Now there's the other extreme where we went from either having one cloud provider to multiple cloud providers. So there is a need based on specialization that you might choose a different cloud provider for certain types of workloads. For example, Google is an expert in data analytics and managing big data, right? So you might choose GCP for those kind of needs. Whereas like for your Office 365 infrastructure or any other Microsoft related Azure, right? And like that. So this is multi-cloud is usually a combination of multi-vendor strategy combined with your own private cloud offering. And then there's also the other strategy is commercial tension between different vendors. And you might laugh about this, but resilience is a key consideration here as well, because sometimes what happens is like our regulators will demand that we prove that like a certain key infrastructure is resilient beyond beyond what the public cloud providers are willing to offer at this given point in time. So you have to be resilient across different vendors is a demand from our regulators. This is specifically to highly regulated industries like banking, right? So yeah, so for those reasons, kind of like resilience reasons, we have to go for multi-vendors as well. So those are some of the different flavors. Hopefully, like we've kind of like looked at the different jargons that are used and simplified those jargons and put it in simple enough terms for every one of us to understand what these things mean. And as I was saying, there's no one right answer for everyone. There's no one solution fits all different scenarios or needs. So you got to look at like what makes sense for your enterprise, what makes sense for your startup or project that you have, and kind of pick and choose which particular software solution works best for you, right? That's kind of like an overall overview of cloud and the different offerings out there. Just kind of looking at the chats to see if any questions have come about. Okay. Right. Shripad, not sure if there are any questions at this point in time, or we just carry on.
Hello, Harsha. I just would like to ask you, in case of multi-cloud, wherein we use multiple vendors, right, and different cloud service models, right?
Yeah.
What about the service level agreement? I mean, who manages that SLA?
So I can give you a view from the banking perspective, right? Even though like a lot of these things are outsourced to vendors, we as a bank, Barclays as a bank is ultimately responsible for all the services that the bank provides. It doesn't matter who or which vendors do we use. Our commitment to our customers, our regulators, our stakeholders, the buck stops with us. So all these level agreements are managed between us and the vendors. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that means it is a responsibility of a bank, right? Of
the enterprise in this particular. Correct. So we'll ensure that like, whatever the different requirements are kind of gets baked into the SLAs that we sign with the individual vendors. And if the particular vendor is not able to service the particular SLA that is demanded by our stakeholders, by our customers, we have to make sure that there are enough workarounds in place in case we still want to use that particular vendor.
Okay, I have one more question to ask.
Sure.
In case of the mergers, supposedly example of Motorola is taken over by Lenovo. So as all these companies are providing the mobile cloud storage services, right? So how they, manage this? Supposedly X is taken over by Y. What happens to the earlier service providers and their customers?
I'm not sure I 100% understood your question. So do you say that two cloud providers merge, or?
The company, supposedly example, Motorola is one of the
Yeah.
tech giant company, had a mobile division, right? Mobile handset division. It's taken over by Lenovo, Chinese company.
Mm-hmm.
So all these companies are providing you mobile cloud, at least for a 5G, I think. So in case it is merged with a X merged with a Y, what happens to the services provided by earlier company?
Yeah. So I can give a very generic answer, right? Like it depends on a case-by-case basis. When two companies merge, especially companies which are involved in the arena of providing services, it's in their best interest, the taking over companies or the merged entities' best interest, to ensure that there is no disruption to service. So they kind of like work internally when they when these mergers and acquisitions happen, to ensure that like there is no disruption to the service. So they tend to continue to provide the service at the same level as they did before, as two different organizations. However, having said that, there could be a strategic decision where the merged or the new entity chooses not to provide a particular service, right? They say that, like, for whatever X, Y, and Z reason, it doesn't make sense for them to continue in a certain business. And they might choose to either wind down the business by providing compensation to the customers, or to move to other providers, or they might sell the whole particular business entity to another organization who tends to like take over the business, either for the customers that business brings in, and continue to provide that service. I know this is a very generic answer, but it really depends on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Arsha.
Okay. If there are no other questions, and there are no questions on the chat, let's continue our conversation. Right, let's now that we have defined what cloud is, looked at the different various flavors of cloud, let's take a look at what are some of the features and what benefits cloud provides, right? As we go back to the definition, right, one of the key things was elasticity and scalability. And I think we touched upon this to say the ability to scale on demand, the ability to say that today we are small, tomorrow we want to be big, or even automated scaling, right? Majority of the cloud providers provide auto scaling today. So depending on how much traffic is coming through for your APIs or for your service, you can automatically spin up new compute power, right? That can be configured. That is one of the key benefits of cloud. It can either scale horizontally or you can scale vertically, right? Whichever way you want, right? So today you might be running a 32 core box. You can just switch over to a 64 core box at almost a flick of a button or a running of a script, as I said earlier. So this kind of lends itself for the businesses to be agile and innovative. So if you think about it, if you take a step back and think about what stops innovation, right? The biggest hurdle, in my view, for innovation is fear of failure, or the consequences of failure, right? In the past, it used to be extremely, extremely expensive for businesses to fail at a new idea, right? So if the cost of failing is so high, that stops people from innovating. That stops businesses from coming up with new ideas, new services, because the cost of failure is exorbitant. It can impact your existing business in case your new business idea fails, right? Depending on your scale, especially for the smaller companies, it could mean bankruptcy, right? They could go bust trying to start a new service, especially when they have baked business model which is running fine, which is producing revenues, right? Like there'll be a lot of questions to answer. But cloud has made this field level playing, so to say, right? It's not just the big players who can have R&D centers and invest a lot in technology. Now even the small players can equally sign up to a cloud provider and get the scale of an Amazon, right? And you can't beat the scale of an Amazon or a Google, isn't it? So it's kind of made the playing field truly level, so to say. So because, as you said, you can start up a box and shut down a box, and you pay for only what you use. When you come up with an idea, you can easily go like, we got this idea, let's get the infrastructure up and running within a couple of hours or a couple of days, whatever it is, right? Knowing that, like, if it's a runaway success, where it's the happy problem to have, you have hundreds of thousands of customers, you can easily scale, right? So you don't have to worry about, like, what will be the volumes, how successful this particular business idea be 6 months down the line, 3 months down the line, 1 year down the line, right? You don't have to do that capacity management upfront, planning upfront. You kind of start with.
Akshay, if I can just maybe add a bit over here from some experience. So with one of our payment systems that we were introducing, which was going to be a pan-European payment system, and this was before, this was a while back, to be honest. And at that time we had to project volumes up to 5 years out, and then scale design the hardware so that we would have resilience and the ability to handle volumes 5 years out. So as you can imagine, that led to a substantial oversizing of the system, because both the business and us, we couldn't really gauge what the size is. And if you see, when that system was put in, maybe for the first year or so, it was running at 10% capacity. So that's the kind of things that cloud can help us with. Yeah,
absolutely. In today's world, infrastructure not used, especially with technology, like getting out, what's the right word I'm looking for? Sorry?
Obsolete?
Obsolete so quickly, right? So in the past, like, you could buy something which would last for 10 years. But today, you buy even a laptop, it's probably obsolete within a year. You can still continue to use it, but the newer generation of laptops that come about are so much better, right? Like, and you can imagine when it comes to like servers, when it comes to like new chips, they're like innovating at a pace that one can't imagine, right? So we definitely don't want to buy and get locked in either. So, and as Sripad said, if you're running at 10% of your capacity, that means you're wasting 90% of the capacity, right? So this is money being thrown into the well. So when we come to cloud, you pay only for the 10% capacity that you're using. The beauty of it is you don't have to put the money up front, right? You don't have to put up the money up front. And the second is, the even better is, like, you pay for only what you use, right? You can imagine all that capital that used to get tied in is no longer the case. I'll give you it's like an anecdote, right? Like, one of the biggest businesses for most of the enterprises today, and maybe buying a few oil and drilling, maybe. Majority of the enterprises spend most of their money, which is costs, go towards technology. And even within the technology, majority of the money goes into infrastructure, right? So keeping the lights on, as we call it, keeping the business running is the biggest cost. So the amount of money left over for change and innovation becomes so much. So if you think about it, if this big cost of infrastructure is moved away or removed somehow or reduced, right? All that money becomes available for innovating, bringing in new change, and taking the business to the next level. So that's the kind of elasticity and that brings the cloud brings into the business as well. Right? So it's not just, don't think of technology as like a something that runs in the background, but nowadays like technology is a driver. Technology drives most of the businesses, whether it be banking. I think famously, like a few years back, the CEO of Citibank said that we are a technology company with a banking license, right? So that is the importance that technology has in today's world for most businesses. And this can be extended to majority of the businesses, not just in banking. The other feature of cloud is self-service and automation, right? So today, like, as I was saying, you want a box, you press a button, and voila, the box magically appears. Same with automation. You don't even have to press that button. You don't have to have that army of people like setting up racks and putting the servers on, maintaining and managing the servers, right? It can all be automated. What this means for most of the enterprises is that like productivity goes to the roof. You don't have like developers sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for servers to be made available to them, and it makes the organization very efficient as well. Right? You don't have to have an army of people just looking after infrastructure. It doesn't mean that like there has been job losses because of this. It's just the nature of the job has changed, right? So all those guys who used to be your administrators and people looking after infrastructure have in the cloud world would become like automation engineers, right? They would become like as infrastructure is made available as code, they'll become like the people who write that code to manage that infrastructure. Yep. And that time can be used for better purposes. Cloud provides resilience, as we know, like majority of these cloud providers, the public cloud providers, are there in multiple regions and multiple continents, multiple countries, multiple regions. So resilience comes out of the box. It doesn't mean that like you completely away from for resilience, but you need to ensure that your application is resilient. But like all the undifferentiated services of that goes behind the scenes of managing that resilience, the cloud provider does it. Benefit like straight away off the bat without thinking about it. Operational resilience, right? One particular region, especially like if you remember a couple of years, Mumbai was down because of floods, right? I'm sure all of us remember that. 2010, 11 probably, yeah. And like if you are using one of the public providers, you could easily switch away from that particular region, right? In case that particular data center goes down. And even within a region, right? Cloud providers make sure that they have multiple data centers so they can switch from one to the other. The usage-based billing, that's one of the key things about cloud, for public cloud. You pay for what you use, and that means that like from a fixed biggest expenses, as I was telling you, is technology within technology infrastructure. If you can move that away into a variable cost base, that makes a huge big advantage. So if you look at it, for businesses, most businesses want to reduce their fixed price or fixed costs, and they don't really mind their operational costs going down, right? The initial layout for running a business is what everyone tends to look to reduce. So that is something that cloud really makes, right?
Yeah, Harsha, maybe one thing I can add over here. So, one of the things that this has really helped with is test systems. So we have some key systems where we need 2 or 3 or more test environments because they are just constantly being tested for one change or the other. And the ability to now, earlier there was always a limit as to how many instances of test that system we can have in test because of the cost of the hardware and the personnel. But now it's much easier to just spin up one of these on demand, perform whatever is that round of testing, shut them down, and the cost goes away. So it's just made that a lot easier now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good example. And the other one that I can think of is like our risk engines, right? So in order to calculate risk across our portfolio, what we tend to do is like run a lot of scenarios, especially with end of day risk, as the name suggests, it's run once a day. However, like, given the size of the portfolios that we have, this could run for anywhere between a couple of hours to like, 1 or 2 hours to like easily 6 to 8 hours. Imagine if something goes wrong in this, you would have to repeat the whole thing. I mean, of course, there are like ways to go about it, which we have been doing all these years. Now you can suddenly like, whether the simulations can be done across multiple hundreds of boxes at the same time. Server estate just standing by simulations. Now, with cloud, you can very easily spin up those boxes. In fact, like in fact, we spin up like thousands of boxes today, and the entire calculation is done within a few minutes. Right? And if you want to rerun the simulation, not a problem, because it takes only a minute. And we don't pay for these thousands of boxes that we run the simulation on. Right? We pay for only those few minutes when the calculations are running. And when the calculation is done, we shut it all down, and we don't pay for it. Yeah, no. So that's another example. Right? There are hundreds of like examples of this. Another example like that I can think of is these Amazon Prime Day or the what's the Black Monday sale, isn't it? The Friday sale, Monday
Black
sale,
Friday, I think.
Friday sale, and the Technology Monday, isn't it? So you can see that like most of the retailers who get like maybe hundreds of thousands of requests every day suddenly start getting like millions of requests in that particular to service only those 2 days across 365 days. The cost of doing that would be humongous. And people used to do that, right? Right from payment providers to banks to everyone. The way that you like plan for capacity is planned for those 2 days, right? Look at the volumes for the last couple of years, multiply that by, heuristic. This year will be better than last year, like human nature. And we would like double it or 1.5 times it and say that we're going to get that much volume on Black Friday. So let's like plan for that. And that's the infrastructure we used to plan for. But now like cloud makes that so much easier. Don't have to plan for that. Like, as the volume keeps increasing, if you go auto scaling switched on, the new boxes keeps getting spun up, right? You can define those thresholds to say, if my CPU goes beyond, average CPU goes beyond like 60%, spin up 10 more boxes to keep it below 60% or 80%, so that no customer is kept waiting. So that's like the beauty of auto scaling and cloud. And you pay for only those 2 days, right? When the volume is so high. And as the volume goes down, and the auto scaling brings down the number of instances you have, brings down the number of servers that you have, and of course your infrastructure bill comes down. So when you're making a lot of money on those 2 days, of course you're spending a lot of money on infrastructure. The rest of the days you're not. Right, global reach. What I mean by this is like, it's like you might have only a handful of customers, say in Australia. But if your infrastructure runs in London, you don't want these customers like to connect all the way to London and wait for and provide a poor service, right? In today's world, in today's competitive world, if you keep a customer waiting, or if the service is not enough, if it disconnects a client, he's not going to come back to you for the Australia franchise. You've got to make sure that the first 10 customers that you get the best of class service. So what do? In the past, you would have to set up a data center in Australia, invest, spend millions of dollars, with the hope that these 10 customers become like 10,000 customers by the end of the year. Because if it didn't become 10,000, you'd be losing a lot of money very, very quickly. And most of the data centers wanted you to sign in agreement 3 years at an amount of infrastructure. Now you just go to an Amazon or a Google and say that you want the region Australia. Click of a button, right? Like if you see most of the cloud providers, it's a drop down to say which region you want. and even within which country you want, which region you want, it's all a drop down. So that you have that global reach. And with the advent of CDNs, and CDNs are not new. Like the Akamai has been Akamai.
Akamai, yeah.
And Akamai has been around for about 15, 20 years now, but it's becoming more and more now, right? Like, you can keep that heavy load content closest to your customer. One of the biggest benefits of cloud is evergreening. If we think about it in traditional infrastructure, the moment you buy a box and install a software, within no time, it's obsolete. Right? So you have to keep up to date. Especially with software, you got to make sure that you keep up with the upgrades that the vendor is providing. Because even you might say that my business doesn't need the latest and the greatest, but there is no such thing like my business doesn't need the latest security patch, right? Security patches are not optional because you are putting your entire organization, your entire customer base at risk if your infrastructure is not secure. So, and like there is only that much time backwards compatibility that vendors provider provides, software vendor provides. So they might say that like, if you're 2 versions behind or 3 versions behind, we'll still provide you the security patches because it becomes very expensive for them to provide a security patch for a software which is 10 years. They won't provide. You won't even get like software support from most of the vendors for software which is X number of years old. Right? So for that matter, you have to keep your software up to date. And not only just your application software, but all the software which it depends on, the operating system, all these different software that you use. Constantly you're upgrading. And I was telling you about in the banks, the biggest expense is technology, and the biggest technology expense is infrastructure, right? Even within that, like the biggest expense that we in the change world, right? So it's not about new businesses or new ideas or whatever, but it is keeping the lights on. What that means is keeping software and hardware up to date, up to now, right? Up to the latest security patches. That is where most of the money goes. Come to the world of cloud. This is all service is that like any service that doesn't directly make money for your business is an undifferentiated service. Right? Any service that doesn't give you a distinct advantage of running for running the business is an undifferentiated service. So keeping software up to date is a necessary task, but it's not a task which gives you an advantage over your competitor. If you don't do it, you're at a disadvantage. If you do it, you're not at an advantage. So this task can be offloaded to the vendor provider, to the public cloud vendor. So evergreening becomes not an issue anymore. Most of the software, all you have to do is test that your application works on the latest software that is coming about. You don't have to worry about keeping it up to date. The last one that I would like to touch upon in this is like ability to deal with large amounts of data, right? So one of the needs today is to kind of being able to deal with complex amount of data, large amounts of data, which is complex, right? Yes, it had been the domain of a few big enterprises to deal with large amounts of data. Like if you look back, it used to be the pharma industry, probably the oil industry, the telecoms industry, and the banking industry. Bar these few industries and a handful of organizations within these industries, nobody had the ability to deal with large amounts of data. Like petabytes of data we are talking about. So that, as I was saying, like cloud is a great leveler. So even you and me today, like individuals, can go and choose to like analyze large amounts of data, or with a cloud provider like Google or Amazon, right? So we can go and choose to like get that infrastructure, run our analytics, and shut it down when we don't need it. And the same advantages like that is available to individuals is available to enterprise as well. So all the medium and small enterprises can dabble with large amounts of big data today, like which used to be the domain of a handful of enterprises. Right. Srikar, let's, and there are like lots of different features. Like we just touched upon like the tip of the iceberg, right? I just picked a few of them to talk about and the benefits that they're bring. But definitely, this is the tip of the iceberg. Srikar, shall we? Right. No introduction to cloud is complete if we don't talk about migration strategies. This is not so much relevant for the startups and for new organizations which are, kind of starting their journey already in cloud. And like so we're not like talking about the Spotifys of the world who were born in the cloud, so to say, right? These are organizations which existed, like organizations like Barclays, right? We've been in business for 400 years, out of which probably the last 30, 40, 50 years when technology came into play, Barclays was one of the first ones to put an ATM onto the main street. So we were in technology like as soon as it was available. So equally, that means we have a lot of legacy technology sitting around in banks and in large enterprises. So there isn't a straight line migration strategy that one can profuse to all organizations. So anybody who's got existing infrastructure needs to think about how they move to cloud. So this is, again, credit to our friends in Amazon. This is publicly available. I think Sripad has given the link to this particular site as well. It's on public domain. You can go look it up. Briefly talking about, like, there are 6 options that you have when you look at a particular service for an in banking, we have a joke in banking technology, right? The best kind of software or the best kind of code is the one that you don't write. So going by that, the first thing to see is like within your infrastructure, within your software landscape, what are the ones that you don't really need? What are the functions that we can move away and can we decommission that application? Can we retire that particular software or hardware? That is path number 1 that we look at in terms of simplification. Okay? So if it cannot be decommissioned or retired, then you look at the other 5 migration paths. And as we talked about, certain applications don't lend themselves to be moved on to cloud, either because of technology limitations or because of cost constraints. Some of them are too expensive to be touched, and some of them are too old to be touched. Some of them are not supported in the public cloud domains. So those are the ones that you look at, like to retain within your own on-premise infrastructure landscape, right? So, and the last one is also like in heavily regulated industries, there are certain types of information which cannot be put on the public domain. And certain country regulators do not allow the data from their customer base to be put on public cloud. So all those kind of limitations you've got to look at. And if your application is dealing with such kind of data, you're not allowed to put it on public cloud. Even though I say this, the world is changing. Even regulators, the DPCs of the world, the central banks of the world are moving towards public cloud. So it's an evolving landscape. It will change, but we're not there yet. So those kind of data loads, you might want to choose to keep it in-house. And then comes like the other 4 options. So what are you going to do? Like, one of the easiest and the simplest or the shortest path is just to rehost. You got certain infrastructure, certain software in-house, just take it as is, lift it, and shift it into cloud. So basically, like, you're not taking any advantage of any of the features that the cloud provides. All you're doing is lifting and shifting. And there is even though like it's broadly, I said that you're not using any of the features of cloud and you might not get any of the benefits that cloud offers, there is a particular business case or use case for going for this strategy. Usually it tends to be that you want to shut down your data center in a particular region or there is a legacy data center where your lease is coming up and you have very little time, and you have you want to very quickly move, because if you renew your lease, you're going to be like stuck for another 3 to 5 years. If that's the case, then like there is a very good argument as to why you would be forced. Or you're shutting down business in a certain part of the world, right? However, as I said, like you'll not get any of the benefits if you got crap in-house, pardon my French, and you move to like public cloud infrastructure. Just because you're on public cloud doesn't mean that like any of that will improve. If it was no good before, it'll be no good here. Yeah, that is your first path, rehosting. But as I said, there is a very good use case as to why you choose this particular path. The other one is like replatforming, right? So this is kind of what I call as the middle ground. You don't want to completely re-architect your application to be cloud ready. You don't want to rehost, so you kind of do a compromise. Let me see what is the minimum basic changes that I need in order to like leverage the benefits of the features that cloud provides. A good example is like looking at legacy software, especially the supporting software like your operating systems, your databases and things like that, and bringing them to like the latest software. So if you're on Windows 2008, you go to Windows 2016, or if you're on Oracle Cloud, you go to Oracle 19. Like those kind of things. You try and lift, you try and re-platform as much as possible without actually touching the application software itself. And the advantages, you have at least like touched upon evergreening, given that you're doing a lift and shift, but still at least you're kind of like come to the latest in supporting software. And this kind of usually tends to be cheaper when it comes to migration when compared to refactoring, but much more expensive when compared to rehosting, right? And you also look at like making sure that the software doesn't run when it's not needed. You shut down infrastructure when it's not needed. Those kind of things that you take care of. And when it comes to security, of course, like you'll make sure that your data in transit and data in at rest are encrypted. Right? So those are some of the considerations when you do replatforming. Repurchasing is another route that people take. We kind of look at like, if the same function is done by multiple different applications, and if you tend to use different vendors as well, we kind of look at like, does it make sense to kind of consolidate all that and buy a particular vendor platform which is cloud ready. So most of the vendors now, software vendors nowadays, provide a version which is cloud ready. So you can look at that, say that like, we're going to shut down all these things and go for a cloud ready vendor software. That's the repurchasing route, so to say. The last one is re-architecting and refactoring, right? This is where, for as software engineers or application engineers, like find it the most interesting. They get to play, so to say, right? Like, so you kind of take a look at like what your application functionality is, and you look at like how your application is built today and how you change it in order to like make the most of the features and benefits that cloud is providing, right? So this is where the most re-architecting and refactoring happens to make it cloud ready. So the disadvantage here is it can be expensive. You should make sure that you do it in a iterative fashion, not try to like change the world in 2 days. So that's like, you slowly change it, move certain functionality onto cloud, and keep that iterative right? But the advantage is operating costs come down quite a bit. As I was telling you, if you take applications running in your own, or running in your own premises today and lift and shift it as is onto cloud, it might become that the infrastructure in cloud is more expensive to run than what you have today. However, like So that one cost come down quite a bit. You can optimize as you refactor.
Yeah, I think one thing maybe I'll add, Harsha, is that we also need to take while this is the route for an application, typically with a large organization there'll be a portfolio, and you need to do this at a portfolio level, and then you start running into interesting considerations like application A is highly dependent, or there's a large data integration requirement with application B. So just take an application A by itself, you might say yes, I will choose this route. But the moment you start looking at those dependencies, as you mentioned earlier, that data locality principle comes into play, and then you have to maybe take a different decision in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots and lots and lots of considerations in which path we take, right? Okay. How are we doing on time, Sripat?
Let's see, we are just an hour in, hour and a half.
Okay.
I think we may let's move on. I think
Yeah.
we have a couple of breaks as well to get to.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let me briefly touch upon the characteristics of financial services and how they lend themselves to be, used in a cloud context, and how it's beneficial for the businesses. So, right, let's start off with the banking industry being systemically important. What I mean by that is, like, if you take the big banks of the world, right, like an HSBC in Hong Kong, for example, or a Barclays in the UK. Right? I can't remember the exact number, but like Barclays, I believe, was, and keep me honest here, probably running about 40% of all payments that go through in UK goes through Barclays.
Yes,
right?
around a third. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So even then, like, can you imagine the Barclays infrastructure goes down, 30% of all businesses in the UK comes to a standstill. It's probably higher for an HSBC in Hong Kong. And in India, we have like certain big banks, right? Like the SBIs of the world, the ICICIs of India. If their infrastructure goes down, like, business can come to a standstill, life can come to a standstill. So that's what we mean by being systemically important. So if there is an outage in one of these banks, it's not just the technology people have to answer to the CEOs and the CIOs, but the CEOs and the CIOs will get called in by regulators, by the board, because the board will get called in by the regulators. RBI will say, why was SBI down for 2 hours? It's not acceptable. Right? And similarly, like the PRA or the regulator in the UK will call the Barclays board or the Barclays CEO to come in and answer if something goes wrong with our payment system or with our ATM system. Right? So it becomes so much more important to say that, like, that no infrastructure, the infrastructure that supports some of these critical businesses cannot go down. And that is where the resilience provided by public cloud providers comes into play. The Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, right? I think like a good example is like the durability of S3, right? 99 points, as they call it. Then I can't remember, is it 9 nines or 11 nines? It's like 99.9999999 to the 11th degree. They ensure that it is available and durable.
Yeah, a rule of 5 9. Rule of 5 9. 99.999.
And the second one is that it's highly regulated, right? You cannot just do whatever is the most profitable or most beneficial to your own organization. You gotta like make sure that whatever you do falls into regulation, or it doesn't fall foul of the central bank, and then equally like our stakeholders, right? Like our stakeholders like are the public. It's public's money. So as a customer of the bank, I want the bank to be highly regulated. And the third point that is that I wanted to make was that it's constantly changing, right? The financial industry is constantly changing. Whether we talk regulations to keep everyone safe, especially after the financial crisis, lots of regulations have taken, and the key continues to change. So the banks need to continuously evolve in order to meet these regulations and the financial industry in general. Pressures on margin are constant, especially with the fintechs coming and the new banks coming in, right? Like they're not only taking over business, but they're also coming over with innovative ways of doing business. So it's vitally important that we are agile and nimble and are able to innovate. And that's exactly what we discussed. The public clouds allow us to do, right? We don't have to like put in large amounts of money upfront. So it encourages innovation within larger organizations like banks. And customer behavior is definitely changing, right? Like in the last 1.5 years, I haven't been to a bank. I haven't been to an ATM. I guess it's the same case for most of you guys. So definitely the way customers are using the banks and using the financial industry is changing. If the banks don't adopt, they'll not be relevant in a few years' time. And that kind of behavioral change from the customer, demanding behavioral change from the banks, is to a large extent made easy by the cloud providers, right? By going on to cloud. There are like other considerations as well, right? Like brand and reputation is another one. So while choosing our vendors, we need to be very, very careful, right? Like as I said, we cannot afford to have some infrastructure go down is a good one, right? Because we have a brand and a reputation to protect. Security and data privacy is like key and paramount. We are dealing with people's money, so there is no excuse for any kind of security or data breach for the bank. Finally, like data, as we talked about, is like vitally important. It kind of shows us how customer behavior is changing. Rising volumes and the opportunity to deal with big data, kind of helps us to provide better service at a lower cost, right? So if we know exactly what our customers want, so we invest in the right technologies, we invest in the right businesses, we invest in the right services, and that is made easy or possible by the amount of data that we can analyze very quickly using the public cloud infrastructure. Right. Now, I don't want to delve too much into this, given that like we want to talk about cloud more than financial services. So let's move on. All right. We come to Q&A now. So this is a dedicated, I believe, 10 to 15 minutes so that people can ask questions. Right. And as I said, no topic is off limits. We greatly appreciate if you keep away from Barclay specific questions. But we'll let you know if you're unable to answer the question, because we are not allowed to answer the question, and equally if you don't know the answer to it.
Yep. So I think as Harsha mentioned at the beginning, please just raise your hand if you have a question. I think the hosts can.
Yeah. I think I believe what you're talking about the regulatory compliances means PCI-DSS payment card industry DSS standard or GLBA or SOC, right? Which are governing the financial entities, right? I mean PCI-DSS, GLBA, SOC. These are the regulatory compliances, right? Internationally.
Yeah. So what is the question? Maybe I missed the question.
You were talking about the regulatory compliances.
Mm-hmm. Right.
With respect to regulatory compliances with the financial institutions, we have a payment card industry PCI-DSS standard,
Yeah.
GLBA, and SOX, SOC.
SOX, yes.
Play, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And even now recently introduced the European GDPR Act, which is Global Data Protection Regulation Act.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
while selecting those clouds, in service provider? Because major cloud providers are, I think I'm audible, right? There's no issue.
I can't hear you very well. I'm sorry,
Oh,
but
sorry, let me.
I don't know if Shripad, you can hear him.
It's
Sorry.
there's a bit of noise, but yeah, I can kind of make out.
Okay.
I mean, while selecting these cloud service providers, do you consider what compliances they follow?
Yes, the short answer is yes. So most of the cloud providers, the big ones at least, what they do is like they have a dedicated um, group within the cloud, within their organizations to study the new regulations that are coming about in the financial industry and complying with those regulations. So they self-certify themselves. So that becomes one of the key selection criteria when we are looking at cloud providers for the banking industry. But equally, as I said, we can rely on them to like say that they are compliant. However, the buck stops with us as a bank, right? So the ultimate responsibility still lies with us to ensure whatever infrastructure, whatever vendors we use, we are compliant with the regulations. So so what we do is like we look at like whether the service provider, whether it be cloud or otherwise, is capable of like complying with the different regulations. Because when we talk about regulations, as you said, like each of within banking, we have various different regulations. And within each country, the country has country-specific regulations. RBI, for example, very recently came about and said, you cannot keep any payment data related to India outside of India. It needs to be locally kept. So that is a regulation and which we need to comply. And if we have chosen a cloud provider which doesn't have presence in India, there's no way that we can comply with that regulation, right? So it becomes vitally important for us that our cloud partners have the ability to store the data in India, within India, as per RBI regulations. I hope that answers.
Thank you. Thank you, Varsha. Thank you, Sripat. There are a few questions in chat box.
Yeah, let's do that. I think there was one point about adding cloud security. Yes, we do have some slides later to cover that. In terms of a question from Vijaya, sorry. So, Harsha, do you mind taking this one? What are third-party workloads for hybrid clouds? How are they managed, charged, and monitored?
Mm-hmm. Sure. When I talk about third-party workloads, like what I was talking about was workloads that run on third-party software, workloads that are specific to certain vendors, right? So those vendor software workloads may not lend itself to run on cloud because the software itself, even though the vendor might have a latest version which runs on cloud today, the version that we are running within the bank may be a few years old, and we don't have any inclination to move to the latest version of that particular software, maybe because we plan to decommission that particular application in the near future. Those are the third-party workloads that I was talking about. What are the third-party workloads for hybrid clouds? So it doesn't matter, like, the hybrid cloud is, at the end of the day, the platform on which we run the software, right? Whether it be in-house, whether it be public cloud. So what we look at is whether that particular software itself can be run on the cloud platform, whether it be a virtualized platform or be a containerized platform. Shripad, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the question goes on to ask how are they managed, charged, and monitored. I mean, there's nothing special about third-party workloads, as Harsha mentioned. It's just maybe it's a confusion over terminology, but it's a third-party product rather than something developed in-house. Now, in some cases, yes, some cloud providers do have a pay-per-use model for some software, but generally speaking, that's not what we are talking about over here, I think.
Yeah. If you're talking about licensed software, yes, like the cloud providers do sign up with the license provider themselves directly, and they kind of allow the pay-per-use model even there.
Right. Right. I think let's move on. What is resilience for multi-cloud, and what are the criteria for that?
Okay, you want to take this one, Shripad?
Sure. So, I think as Harsha mentioned, some of the regulators, they are looking, while they are supportive of, banks adopting cloud, they also want to ensure that the bank is aware or is able to handle situation where a given cloud provider itself is not accessible. One consideration where are you able to be resilient across cloud providers? Now, it's worth highlighting that this kind of resiliency is only expected for very specific services that have a high resiliency requirement. Payments, for example, comes to mind, and where because it is so critical to the economy, the expectation is you should be able to survive if one of your cloud providers goes bankrupt. And that's not just for cloud providers. Whenever we look at any technology provider, or say someone who's handling an aspect of operational service, in every case the question about how will the bank continue to provide service to customers if that supplier fails to meet its commitments to the bank is always a question that the bank gets asked, particularly for critical services. And that's where multi-cloud can help us. When we say criteria, I'm not sure what that means, but broadly speaking, what we're looking at is similar kinds of capabilities. Whether it's a virtualization, container management, object storage, where you can actually have that service running across multiple cloud providers. And that is obviously one criteria, and similar levels of SLA across them. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. So this is from Yugesh.
Yeah.
Presently, any emerging technology that may replace cloud computing? How do you find the cloud computing stand in the future 10 years?
This is a good
Do you
one.
want to take that? Sure.
Yeah, I'll take a stab.
Okay.
Cloud itself is constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly innovating, right? So you can, like, if you look at the Amazons, the Googles of the world, they are changing and constantly innovating themselves, right? So I mean, if you take a step back, like where the cloud offering came, an alternative for you to setting up your own boxes, whether it be under your desk or whether it be in a data center, right? And managing that data center. So that was the main goal 15 years ago, to kind of say, right, if you think about the rack space offering, right, like they would like do all the hard work of procuring the hardware and racking it and all of that. Still, it was your hardware, right? So you own the box and you paid for it and you committed to using it for 3 to 5 years. That was the alternative that cloud was providing, saying that like you don't have to do that. You can kind of come and say, I want Xbox today, and you will say, I don't want this Xbox today. There was no commitment, right? And even today, if you look at cloud, there is the shared model, the infrastructure that you're using is a shared infrastructure, or you can go for dedicated infrastructure, right? They'll name a box saying that this is Yogesh's box, right? And make sure that nobody has access to it, nobody uses it. It's not a shared box, it's a dedicated box. The more and more we kind of go to the shared model, the more and more like, we go to a better cost efficient model. And that is where the whole, evolution of cloud was. But today, if you look at it, like we're already moving away from this thing like, this is my hardware, this is my shared infrastructure kind of thing, to serverless, right? The latest and the greatest offering is to go serverless, to not even have a box, even for that couple of hours that you need it to run. You just provide the software and don't bother about where that software runs. All you're interested in is, this is the software, these are the inputs, give me the output, and the cloud provider takes care of it for you, right? That's the serverless model that we are moving towards. Yeah. Very little runs on serverless today. But more my thinking is that, like, as the years come about in the next couple of few years, we'll see more and more things moving towards being serverless. I do not have, the ability to predict the future. I don't know what it will be in 10 years time, but in the next couple of years, I believe that like a lot of it will move towards serverless. A lot of it will move towards software as a service, right? Rather than just like leveraging cloud for infrastructure or that. That's my view.
Maybe two things I'll add, Harsha. One is the growth of edge computing. I guess maybe going back to the way cloud computing is defined, it can encompass pretty much anything that comes along. So maybe, and you will see that the cloud providers, when there's a requirement for, say, edge computing, which is you want, processing capacity, maybe at your 5G tower base station, or at a wellhead where you're monitoring large amounts of data. So they are getting into that space as well, and they're still calling it cloud computing, even though technically it is edge computing. So that is one thing that I think is gaining currency, and the
Yes.
other, to a certain extent, is specialized AI or ML hardware. There have been, so if you look at the Amazons and Azures, they use standard x86 hardware. Maybe they've started using GPU now. They have their own ARM server. There's a whole bunch of companies that are now working on highly custom silicon to do AI ML, and it remains to be seen whether that kind of hardware will get adopted and generalized, in a cloud environment, or will we again start seeing, specific businesses either hiring or maybe even outright buying that kind of hardware. It gives them a significant advantage. So that's the thing I could think of.
Yeah.
Okay. Any?
I have one more question to ask. Hello.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So cloud adoption is like a strategic decision for the organization. So how do you calculate that cloud budget?
How do we calculate cloud budget? Right. Let me start. So there are two aspects to this, right? The cloud budget is split into almost two halves. One half is the budget that is required to migrate to the cloud, right? This is what we call as the change budget. The second half of that is the run cost, or what we call as the operating cost. So how much on an ongoing basis do we want to dedicate it for this run cost or the operating cost? So there are two pieces to this puzzle. So based on the current footprint of how much money we spend on an ongoing basis to keep the organization running, we the migration path tends to be a multi-year path. I have seen very few organizations do this within like a year, let alone do it in one shot. Right? So it becomes a multi-year budgeting process where we look at like what is the portfolio which lends itself to migration, and hence like how much money it will cost, and how we want to like split it across multiple years. The migration to cloud itself is what we call as the discovery phase, where we kind of determine the scope of what needs to be migrated, when it needs to be migrated, how much money it's going to be cost. It's a process type. Okay. In terms of operating costs, the other consideration is like as we shift the operating cost base from in-house to cloud, kind of how do we make it efficient? How do we bring the costs down? Is one of the key considerations. Anything to add, Sripat?
No, I think that's fine. Then there's obviously the element of going to cloud. It has its own costs, particularly with a large enterprise. Yeah, it's not as straightforward as just taking. Yeah, sorry, go on.
So I was just thinking, like the other aspect is investing in private cloud, right? So this we talked about, like how we budget for cloud migration to a public cloud space. But investing in a private cloud is a completely different ballgame. This is like kind of, you got to think about So of course, you'll never be able to build a private cloud which scales or has the same scale as a public cloud provider, right? So A, it doesn't make sense. B, we don't require it either. The enterprise doesn't require the same scale as a public cloud. So it's also about determining the kind of have to like budget it to see how much money you're willing to invest in a private cloud.
Yep. I think, Harsha, we are at the little over the halfway mark, so maybe it will be a good time to take a break.
Okay. Does that answer your question? I think it was
Yes,
Amber.
yes, thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I think let's take a 10-minute break and then we can regroup.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Yep. Hi, Harsha. Should we carry on?
Yeah. There is a start only. Thank you.
Okay. Harsha, can you hear me? Yeah. Harsha is, I don't think he's back yet. Just 1 second. Hi, Harsha. Should we carry on?
Yeah, I think so. It's 10 minutes.
Hello everyone. I hope all of them are there. Okay. Yeah, let's start. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So, thanks, Harsha, for that overview of cloud and the financial services and the key role that cloud plays over there. So, what we're going to do next is look at the considerations that we have in financial services technology, and what are the opportunities in the cloud to handle those. Right. So what we have done is we've tried to group them into a set of key considerations. I mean, there can be more than that, but these are the key ones that we thought we will emphasize. One is data, the other is resilience, portability, security, and control. And really, when we think internally about what are the key things to watch out for, at least from an architectural standpoint, these are kind of things that come, and then we look at how can cloud help us address each of these. What we'll do is we'll pick each of them in turn. The first one is a little vaguely defined as data, but basically we are talking about data locality, data storage, data processing, data transfer. So as you can see, we need data, and I think this is something so the way all of these slides are structured is on the left we have some key requirements that we have in that particular area, and on the right the capabilities that the cloud offers us to meet them. And I think a key point that I'll just mention before starting is that it's not like financial services or banks were unable to meet these requirements before. It's just that the cloud allows us to meet these requirements a lot more easily, a lot more agile fashion, and cheaper as well. So that's the key thing to keep in mind. Okay, so if we start first on the left-hand side, there's a question of data locality, and or a requirement for data locality, and that comes for a few different reasons. One is regulatory needs. So as Harsha mentioned, recently the RBI required all payment data, to be held within the geographies of India, and it could only be taken out for certain types of processing and for very short amounts of time. So obviously that regulation, it introduced a data locality requirement, and because most of the cloud providers, they have global locations and they have edge locations, and it was possible for most of the international banks to not look at setting up other than those who already had such a data center in Pune, to not have to go around and create a data center or a co-location, and instead leverage some of these cloud providers to meet that regulatory requirement. The other reason is performance. So you have, for example, on the market side, when we are dealing with algorithmic trading, there is a need to have that processing happen as close to the exchange as possible. So once again, you can pick locations that are close to the exchange, or if we are thinking in a more general, consumer sense, you want your processing to happen, say, at a 5G tower, so that when someone is working on your app, if something is really time critical, you can have them getting responses from their cell provider's tower, and avoid the whole hop to the over the cloud to the central data center. So again, I think as we mentioned earlier, most of the cloud providers have started providing edge locations, whether it's at your 5G base stations, or in some cases even making their capabilities available at the edge, in a remote location away from their data center. Right? The next requirement is storage. Financial industries generate huge amounts of data, maybe not in the same scale as oil and natural gas exploration, but still, we do generate a significant amount of data every day, in terms of transactions and what have you. And what cloud allows us to do is have really enormously affordable, almost petabyte scale storage, and in a number of different tiers. So if you're not familiar with the storage tiers, most of the cloud providers, they give you different kinds of or types of storage depending upon what your requirements are in terms of how quickly you need to be able to access them, and what is the kind of resilience that you want for them. Do you want to, is it like a cold storage where you want to put the data and you don't really need to pull it out unless there is some kind of a ask for it, or is it very hot data that needs to be constantly changed, right? Or is it data that is read only? You want to put it there and you just need to be able to read from it, but you don't expect to be constantly writing to it. They have different storage tiers and different storage solutions for all of these requirements. They are affordable and they can scale up to petabytes, and that is something really useful.
May I add,
Yeah, please.
With the scale is like, right from really fast data that needs to be kept in memory, like, you can imagine they're much smaller. How about like really required for low latency, to the extreme where regulations require us to keep all data for either 7 years or 10 years.
Yeah.
In very, very rare cases do we actually pull this data out, but it needs to be there when we want to pull it out. And it's okay to take like anywhere between 2 to 3 days to a week to pull the data out. So small amounts of data, low latency in memory, to 10 years worth of data, which is okay to be pulled out like once in a couple of years. And it's okay even if it takes 2 to 3 years. Sorry, 2 to 3 days to a week. So the scale really varies of the requirements, and the cloud gives us like the entire spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And so far, a lot of these requirements, if you had to meet them, it would mean creating a very large capital investment, in these storage tiers within the institution. Cloud just right. The other aspect is data transfer. We need to be able, we are always going to work in a hybrid cloud environment, and we need to be able to transfer data in and out of the cloud. So again, there, the cloud providers have a number of solutions. We have, of course, your online, which is you set up either a VPN link or what is called in some cases a transit gateway, which directly connects your data centers to the cloud, and you can have like a real-time data transfer. And there are, of course, a number of offline transfer options. So this is when you really need to transfer massive amounts, and we're talking about terabytes of data need to be transferred into the cloud provider. I think the example that Harsha mentioned earlier was something to do with risk pricing. Is that right, Harsha? So you need to have a lot of data. You need to transport it. And in that case, as was proved a while back, there is a difference where if you have even a physical storage mechanism which is of extremely high capacity, but you need to physically move it. You need to connect it at your data center. You need to transfer the data over, and then physically move it to the cloud provider's data center, and then have that data copied over there. In some cases, if the volume of data is too large, this whole process can actually be faster, more reliable, and cheaper than trying to send that same amount of data over a live network connection. So yeah, there are some interesting capabilities regarding offline transfer that cloud providers provide, and that is handy as well. And lastly, when we talk about data processing, then we do need analytic or machine learning related workloads. And again, the cloud providers have managed services that can be used on demand. As Harsha was explaining earlier, if you want to do one run of this analytic process or machine learning process, you really only need that hardware for that amount of time, and once that run is done, you don't really need it again for, say, another, 20 or 22 hours, let's say, right? Assuming it's a daily kind of event. So on-demand pricing really is much more cost-effective, and more importantly, most of the cloud providers, now they provide managed services for some of these machine learning or analytical workloads. And what that does is, it reduces the operational overhead for the bank, right? So rather than having a team of people who are skilled in terms of, say, taking just a raw virtual box and then, deploying the service, managing it, configuring it, and all of that, you get a lot more bang out of the buck by using a managed service to do all of that for you. So that was, on a few points on the data aspect. Harsha, anything would you like to add on this?
No, I think you covered most of the important aspects. As we said in the beginning, right? Like there are a lot more dimensions to this, right? We're not going to cover them, so we'll just pick on key dimensions and we'll talk about a few of them. And if you have some questions on specific aspects, please do raise them in the chat as you've done before.
Yeah. So, once we go through all of these, we will have a Q&A session. So, either right now you can put your questions in the chat, just make sure you don't forget, or if you can hold on, then during the Q&A session, you just raise your hand and you can ask it over the audio line as well. Okay. So let's move on. Security. So I think this was, one of the questions that we were asked to pick up. So hopefully, what we say here will address it, right? So when we think about security, there are three main security requirements. I'm just simplifying things a bit, but broadly, there are three main pillars of security. And we're talking information security. One is confidentiality. So, if we just take an example of your bank account, so confidentiality means that only you and any authorized bank personnel should be able to see, your what is your bank balance, what are your bank transactions. Integrity means that there should be a well-defined and controlled process through which any changes can be made. So it should not be possible, for example, for someone to just connect to the database where all the bank accounts are held and run an SQL update and update your bank balance or add spurious transactions. Right? You need a proper authorized process to make those changes. So that is integrity, the integrity of the data. And lastly is availability, that you do want that data available to you whenever you need it. So in that case, you could talk about, say, your not the bank balance, but rather the ability to view your balance or to make transactions or payments. You really want that available to you whenever you need it, right? It shouldn't be that you're trying to make a payment and then you find, my bank's payment gateway is down, I can't make my payment. That's what availability is. And that the consideration, kind of problems there you can think of are, say, denial of service attacks is one thing that can affect availability.
I think a good example nowadays is the Paytm ad, if you guys have seen, right? They've been running a series of ads, right? Like where the girl and the ice cream vendor goes like, yeah, am I going to give it or not? And the mother is trying to pay, try to do the payment. With the availability, or like when the couple go to the restaurant, I thought that was a funny set of advertisements.
Right.
Describe what availability is when you need it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if we then try and map, these requirements onto the cloud and see what are the capabilities we have there, right? So first and foremost, obviously, there's encryption. You want data to be encrypted, whether it is at rest or in transit. So what that means broadly is, at rest is where it is stored on the database or other storage mechanisms that the bank uses. In transit means when I'm accessing my bank account through net banking, the data should be encrypted, as it flows through the pipes, right? So no one who's sitting in the middle should be able to see the data. So obviously, you need encryption both at rest and in transit, and for both scenarios, you have some really interesting capabilities that the cloud provides. So at rest, most cloud providers, whatever storage solutions they have, we talked about the storage tiers, for example, before. There's an ability to encrypt the data at rest, and there are both solutions to encrypt the data at your end before you transmit it to the cloud, as well as native encryption at that end. So the idea being that all of this data is secured by the keys. Now the keys are available in the cloud, but the idea is that you control access to the key and the ability to use that key to decrypt data, so that only authorized people can get the data out. And when we talk about encryption in transit, so you have, for example, load balancer services that handle termination of your TLS connections. So if you're trying to implement a internet banking solution, you can leverage the load balancer to encrypt the connection from the client's mobile device or browser till the front end of your service where it is hosted on the cloud. And of course, you can then implement back-to-back TLS connections behind that as well. We touched upon keys a little bit, but more generally, if you speak about secrets management, right? So this covers, for example, the database password that you use to access to connect to your database. It includes the private keys that handle your TLS sessions, for example. Maybe SSH keys, what have you. So the idea here is, you do not want any of these secrets to be present either in your source code or in your configuration files or any place where they can be snooped or picked up. I think recently people have done scans on GitHub and found that a number of people who should know better are storing their AWS or other cloud credentials within their code on GitHub, and it's just available to everyone. The idea is, that's not what you do. You have your database password held within a secrets management service. You have a certain way to authenticate your application to the secrets management service, and at a programmatic level, you prove that right, this is application A, and therefore I should have access to this database password. It's only then that that solution hands you back that password, and then you can use it to connect to your database and do your actions. Right? There are other services, of course, for handling keys. There are even cloud HSMs, as they are called sometimes, but we'll not maybe get into the details of that. Right. Next is identity and access management, and this is really important. Whenever you're dealing with any of these cloud services, there is the ability to assign identities. So these can be identities to a user, like an administrator or a developer, but these can also be machine identities. So you can have identities for one of your virtual machines, for example, and then linked to that, the ability to then give that particular identity access to any number of services. And in most cases, the access permissions that can be granted are very fine-grained, and we'll touch on this maybe a little later. But what you find is that in some cases, your ability to ensure that developers cannot, say, access production environments, or only certain, run the bank teams can access certain environments, and which kind of actions they can do. It is very straightforward. I won't say easy, but it is possible to automate and set that up in the cloud in a way that is a lot more, easy, and also a lot more robust than what we could achieve in on-premise infrastructure. And that's, really down to the way the cloud providers have architected their infrastructure services. We can talk about network controls. So, you can set up a virtual network of yours. So even if you are actually using, a number of different virtual machines, which could be hosted on any number of different physical servers within the cloud provider's data center, you can, put all of them into a virtual network and have, some guarantees about the data that is flowing between these nodes. or the data that is flowing outside of that virtual network. There are a number of controls that can be imposed. So if you want to implement a standard, 3-tier architecture, you can put your front end, web servers in one virtual network. You can put your database in another. You can put your application server in another, and you can, define very easily a number of rules that allow access between these. If you, again, none of this, it's not like these capabilities don't exist, in your large enterprise data center. It's just that it's a lot harder, right? You need to reach out to a network team. You need to raise a request for creating a virtual network. You need to raise a request for opening up certain ports. It's a whole lot of admin. Whereas in the cloud, it's all, a lot of this is automated, and you can set it up using scripts if you have to. Account segregation. So this is an important capability. What this means is that when you have a large enterprise hosting its services on the cloud, you don't always just create one account and put all your services in that one account, right? So if you see in most cloud providers, your account is the root of the entire identity and access management chain. So if you want to say have a payment service, and let's say you have another service that handles sanction screening, just for example, what you would want to do is, in order to protect, let's say one of these accounts gets taken over, right? Or someone is able to get into your, by exploiting some vulnerability, get into one of these services. You don't then want them able to very easily, jump and start attacking your other services. And also the other aspect is, if you had a failure, you don't want that failure to propagate to all your services that are linked. So, what you would do is you would use different accounts. So you would use different accounts for production versus non-production. You would use different accounts for different services. So you just try and reduce the impact of any security failure in one particular service. And last, I think something Harsha mentioned earlier is evergreening. The pace at which we now see new vulnerabilities coming out, and these are, right from well-used applications to very small libraries. There are vulnerabilities constantly being reported and being fixed. So, if you want to really stay on top of them, the cloud, with some of the capabilities it provides, it makes it a lot easier to do. So, it's not just you want to upgrade in place, right, which is the standard model. It's rather what you can do is you can create an entirely new set of deployments, and then switch over your traffic slowly across to this new deployment. And you can do it in a way that is, doesn't impact your ongoing customer service, right? Okay, so I've spoken a lot. Harsha, anything to add on security?
No, I think you've covered it all. Like, let's move on.
Yep, sure.
Security is like a vast area by itself.
True. And if you are going too fast, or something is not clear, maybe just drop a message into the chat. Raja, could you just quickly check if there's anything in the chat that we should address?
Yeah, so there is a question from Vijay Kamle on what types of encryptions for cloud, especially multi-cloud security. There's some examples of what kind of encryption we use.
Right. So typically, from the bank's perspective, we look at industry standards. So one commonly used standard is NIST, right? So we would use whatever NIST would recommend. So in terms of specific algorithms to be used, specific key lengths to be used, we would within the bank we would kind of mandate and say, okay, you need to use I don't know, AS256, for example, or you need to use TLS 1.2 or more with these certain ciphers and these key lengths. So that is what the bank needs, right? So when we go to a cloud provider, if we are using some of their innate encryption services, then we will look to see, okay, are you able to, do you provide these security features, these particular algorithms, these particular key lengths, right? And the cloud providers also, by the way, are also looking at NIST, right? and they're looking at what NIST recommends, and they are implementing that, right? And they are also trying to be careful about not implementing ciphers and key lengths which are not considered secure. So usually, we don't encounter a problem in this regard. Uh, I I hope that answered the question. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Hopefully, if there's a follow-up, we'll pick it up in the Q&A. Yeah. Um, okay, let's talk about resilience. Now, this is something that Barclays processes 1/3 of the UK GDP. That kind of thing makes it clear why we need this. Now, before we get into resilience, it's worth highlighting that not all services in the bank have the same resilience requirements, right? If you have a payment system, yeah, it has a very high resilience requirement. Whereas if you have for example, an application that generates an end of day report, uh, it is important, but it's not as important if you see. So that's why when we look at it within the bank, again, that portfolio approach, you really want to say, okay, where does this application fit in the end-to-end process? How critical is this end-to-end process? And therefore, what is the resilience requirement that I have for this particular application? So just worth highlighting that it's not like every service in Barclays is deployed across 3 data centers with multiple failovers and what have you. That is not it. Okay. So more technical definition of resilience, if you want, is the ability of a given service to handle external events. So these can be sudden spike in load. These can be a fiber network cable getting cut. This can be a flood, as Harsha mentioned, taking out one of your data centers. That is the kind of idea. You have these external events. How well can your application respond to them while still providing the right level of service to your customers? So resilience requirements, you have no single point of failure. So we have discussed this before. You have multiple availability zones and regions. Actually, if you see over here, uh, typically most enterprises have two, a primary and a secondary data center, if you see, and this is within one region. And most cloud providers in most regions are able to actually exceed that with 3 or even more availability zones. So you can, if you're careful and you architect your application the right way to take advantage of these capabilities, you can actually improve your resilience posture. Scalability, so just being able to respond to unanticipated demand. Again, Harsha touched on this briefly. You have auto scaling, where you can not only scale up, but you can also scale down your processing capacity depending upon the load. And this can be done, it's not that you're just always reacting to the change in load. It can also be that it is planned, so you have your classical Black Friday or Tech Monday kind of events, or even within the payments world, you can, over time, it's quite easy to see a pattern where around the bank holidays, you see a spike in payments. So you can even plan this. It need not be always auto scaling, but the idea being that you buy, rather than buying for what you may need 5 years from now if all the business plans work out, and then you sit with and and resilient as well. You rather you buy what you need and you scale it up on demand, right? And lastly, we come to recovery. So this is you had a very resilient solution, but something happened, right? One of your data centers crashed. So how quickly can you recover from that and put the service back into normal working order? So when we talk about recovery, there are two primary requirements. One is called recovery time objective. So that means how quickly after that disruption could you get back to your original state? And the other is recovery point objective. So this is, in terms of state. So if you were, at a certain point in a process and you were to break that, you were to then pick up later, in the middle, did you lose any data, for example? Did you miss some transactions? That is the kind of question. Or maybe if you're talking in a messaging sense, did you lose some messages that had to be sent from point A to point B? Right. So as you can imagine, with very important services like payments, your recovery time objective and point objective is quite short. Your recovery time objective can be in minutes. Your recovery point objective might actually be 0, and they can say, there can be no data loss. It's just not allowed.
A good example, I think, is like, you kind of put your ATM card in, keyed in your password, and said that you're withdrawing 10,000 rupees, and
Yeah.
you say enter, and it fails at that point. So you're still waiting to collect your money. Right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
definitely want you to recover at the point where it knows that the transaction needs to be cancelled.
Right.
Not that it assumes that you've taken your 10,000 rupees. Or it has
Absolutely.
been 10,000.
Right. So there is a good deal, if we talk about both of these objectives. There's a lot of responsibility that exists at the application level, the way you design and build your application. There is a fair amount of work to do over there. I would not say that the cloud providers really solves this for you, but they do give you infrastructure level capabilities that make it a little more easy to deal with this. So one is, for example, replicas, right? So if you have databases, it is possible to have, relational databases specifically, it is possible to have multiple replicas, some maybe read replicas, some read-write replicas. And the idea therefore being that if your primary database cluster, it loses one box, you kind of pull in one of these replicas and, make sure you get back to fully working condition. The other main thing I would say is provisioning speed, right? So if you look at your traditional data center, I have a highly resilient set of servers. Maybe I put one server in each data center, what have you. Now, if one of those servers has a critical failure, right? Let's say the disk array goes down, the network card burns up, the power supply is interrupted, what have you. In a traditional setup, to then go from there to a point where you again have two servers up and running and fully functional. As you can imagine, it will take a long while, right? And even in an emergency, we are still talking days, right? Whereas in the cloud, provisioning a new server is a matter of minutes, really, right? And if you have got really good automation that handles all of your deployment and configuration, you can actually get a fully functional box ready in a few minutes. Get back to fully working condition. And when we talk about recovery point objective, there's more around the data, and how good you are at maintaining state. So again, in the cloud, you have automated backup and recovery solutions. So if you take relational databases again as an example, right? There's most of the databases within cloud providers. They have the ability to take, stream the logs and actually create backups where you can say, okay, restore this database to me as of, 3 p.m. yesterday. That kind of capability is really powerful if you think about it in terms of getting back to your recovery point objectives. Right. Harsha, anything to add on resilience? Just check what we're doing. Yeah.
No, I think just to re-emphasize, right, like cloud providers do provide the infrastructure that you need in order to make your application resilient. It's up to you as the application architect or the designer to ensure your application is resilient.
Yeah, absolutely.
Question, I'm not sure whether you want to take it now or later. What is the speed for data migration? Is it automated?
So, could you repeat?
What is the speed for data migration? Is it automated? I'm not 100% sure what is the exact question.
So because data migration, I would not classify it as a resiliency concern. It's really, trying to migrate your application and data. But maybe the question is.
Yeah, why don't we do one thing? When we come to Q&A, maybe we
can
ask a question.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Let's move on then. Next category, control. Yeah. Okay. We will delve into this a little more in the myths and realities section. But suffice to say, that there are, in a bank, there are some pretty stringent change management requirements. This in terms of what, when you introduce a change, how do you actually go around specifying the change, developing the change, testing the change, and then deploying the change. You can pretty much think of it as a number of gates that we need to go through. So that is there. And also, when you get to the point of actually deploying, and that is where the cloud can help. Even in terms of deploying the change, there are controls in place which says that you need to secure these approvals before you can deploy the change. The change must only be deployed within a certain window, and also these are the only people who are authorized to deploy the change. So that's the point where in the cloud, the fine-grained role-based access that we covered before, when we talked about IAM, that really helps us. So you can, within your application setup, right, you can very clearly say that this person is a developer, therefore he can deploy a change into this test environment, but he cannot deploy to production. This person is a run the bank, he can therefore deploy changes to production. And then on top of that, you can also link it to your IT service management tooling, right? So you can say that, okay, before deploying this change, this where is the necessary approvals that have been given. Right? So you can actually have those automated controls, and you can integrate them with your IT service management tools to ensure that only changes that have gone through the right approval cycle can be deployed, and also the scope of the change, right? So if the change was approved to make a change to this particular service in production, right? Uh, what this integration can also do is ensure that when someone goes to deploy something, they say that, okay, you have gotten approved to make a change to this component of this service. Fine. So now when you deploy the change, is that what you're actually changing? Are you trying to change something else, right? So that kind of controls, it for someone who is new to banking, it sounds a bit over the top, but believe me, the regulators take a very, very close look at how change gets deployed, right? And what are the controls in place around it. And what cloud does is it allows us to, automate a lot of this and make sure that things are being done the right way. So something that earlier would have been very, user dependent, relies on someone doing something right, or someone else checking to do something is being done right. You can actually automate it in this case. Yeah. The other aspect is audit, right? Again, in a bank, it's very important not just that you have implemented the process that you said, but also that you can evidence it to say that, okay, this was the kind of controls that we needed. Uh, show me, show me where you have implemented. Show me these controls working. Show me a case where this control resulted in this request being denied. That kind of thing. So most of the cloud providers, particularly when you're interacting with their own APIs for deploying services, making changes, and so on, they have an inbuilt tamper-proof audit trail mechanism, which means that any action that is done by a person, there's a full audit trail of it. You can show it to an auditor and say, yep, this is the kind of controls that we have imposed, and here you can see evidence of it, that this has been imposed, right? And one capability that allows all of this to work is infrastructure as code, right? So a lot of the automation that we talked about, that is implemented using infrastructure as code tools. So I don't know if I hope people are familiar with things like CloudFormation and Terraform. But the idea is just like you have version controlled source code for your application, you also have version control code that handles your infrastructure deployment and changes, and that is what makes it possible to automate a lot of these, right? Akshay, anything you would like to add on this?
I was just going to say that, like, this is a real life scenario, right?
Mhm.
About 7 years ago, I was Barclays Hong Kong was being audited. I was sitting in front of the external auditors, which is Hong Kong Monetary Authority. They were going through the change process. Their one question was, right, you have all these change process and controls in place in order to give access to a particular person to a particular box to change a particular component. How do you actually make sure that once that person has got access, he's exactly doing what is described in your change? So going back to what you were saying, Shikhat, being able to tie back, right, what the exact actions of that person to the change, and to say that, like, the actions performed were exactly what was described in the claim. It's key, and this is what our regulators are looking at.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it might be worth also highlighting that it's not that the cloud provider solves this entirely for you. Obviously, if you have your application running and there are application level changes that need to be made, then obviously your application has to be built to maintain that audit trail as well. But we are talking about at the infrastructure and at the managed service layer being able to have a similar kind of audit trail.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, let's move on. Portability, and I think this is time-wise. Where are we? Okay, yeah.
I think we
So
have
this,
another hour left.
right. Yeah,
He's
yeah.
taking the mark in this section.
True. And I think we have a break as well in the middle, so we should be okay. Yeah. Okay, so portability is one of those. At the beginning, Harsha talked about hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, right? So what that needs is the ability to port your workloads and applications from your internal cloud to the public cloud, and also if you're talking about a multi-cloud scenario, to have interoperability between two or more public cloud providers. Now, I think we'll get to this in the myths and realities section, but basically, this is one area that is not fully solved, right? Now, it depends on what you're doing, right? So, in some cases, virtualization or containerization platforms, they can help you to address this, right? So, if you have, let's say, a Kubernetes cluster, just take an example. Uh, with the exception of certain external dependencies, at least what is core to Kubernetes is available to you whether you have a Kubernetes cluster on premise or in cloud provider A or in cloud provider B, right? But again, there's that externalities to it, that are not always uniformly available across the different regions. The other is, of course, virtualization, where if you have a certain virtualization technology on premise, most cloud providers now allow you to take that image from multiple virtualization platforms and actually convert that image into the what you need to deploy on their platform. Right. And the last one, of course, when we talk about portability, is data, right? You need to also transfer or migrate your data. So there are tools, for example, to do data migration from relational databases. So if you have an on-premise relational database and you want to now transfer that data to the cloud provider's relational database, the cloud providers give you some really nice tools to plan that transfer and actually make that transfer, right? And in some cases, this can even be done heterogeneously, where if you're using, say, Oracle on premise, but you want to migrate to, say, Postgres on the managed database service, so they can even provide you tooling that lets you examine your data structure, your table structure, identify what are the possible problem points if you're migrating in a heterogeneous way from one database platform to another, and then write fixes for those, and then actually make the migration happen. More importantly, it is not just one-time migration. There is also a possibility of doing continuous migration, right? So what that means is you have application A, you want to move it to production. You want to move it to the cloud. You can take the database, the data generated by the application on day X, all history of it, move that, and then in days beyond that, move incremental chunks of data so that you get that confidence that my data is getting migrated properly, and then you plan your cutover in a more phased manner, rather than having one big bang where you just go and try to land and get everything working at one time. Right. Harsha, anything to add to that on portability?
No, we are good, I think. Let's see
Okay.
what questions come up if there are any
Yeah.
questions.
Sure. Let's get to the Q&A. Yeah. So, yeah, sorry.
Let's see the question and answers.
Okay. Let's see. What types of other than financial services, what types of encryptions, common cloud? So the encryption requirements are not specific to financial services. When I talk about, for example, the NIST guidelines, they're actually for the U.S. federal government. But given the kind of authority that NIST has in these matters, financial services and also other industries tend to adopt that. Partly because any supplier of goods and services to the U.S. federal government needs to comply with those. So it's kind of a standard for everyone. So when you say common cloud applications, what I would suggest is, when we look at encryption, stick to standards and stick to standard tools. It's a very bad idea to roll your own encryption or encryption implementation for that matter. So, I wouldn't try and distinguish between encryption for financial services and encryption for common cloud applications. I think the reality we live in is that everyone should use as good a quality of encryption as they can, irrespective of what they're doing. Yeah. Okay, I think, or they follow common encryption. What is the speed for data migration? Is it automated? Okay, I think I understood this now. Maybe this is more about data migration than what we talked about later, other than resilience. Yes, as I said, most of the cloud providers have the ability to set up automated data migration, both one-off and continuous. Speed, I guess it depends upon the size of your original data, what kind of transformations need to happen.
Maybe we should ask clarification here.
Yeah.
Speed of data transfer, because data migration really depends on you, right? Like you can choose to migrate data in one shot, you can choose to do it on a continuous basis. The question is from Vijay, right? Vijay, maybe you should, if you can clarify what you mean by this question. In the meanwhile, we can, he's talking about data transfer. So absolutely depends on the pipe that you have between your data center and the cloud. And if the data tends to be very, very large, as Shripad was referring to, there could be a need that like you do offline data transfer, which could be faster than the online link that you might have, right? Like, so for example, Amazon provides their, is it Data Mobile? Like basically it's like a
Snowmobile, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, storage on the back of a truck, right?
Yeah.
So they basically like send this truck across the country or across continents. And it could take like anywhere between a few weeks to a few months, right? To transfer that. We are talking about, I don't know, what's bigger than petabytes? I can't remember.
Zettabytes, I think.
Zettabytes of data, right?
Yeah.
Like moving that across. So moving that across the WAN, you can forget it, right? So there are different solutions. And I think like usually 1 gig, 10 gig lines are common, right? For connectivity. And imagine like you don't want to hog the whole bandwidth just for doing one migration. You still have the rest of the businesses to run, rest of the technology infrastructure to run. So you can't like hog all of that bandwidth either. If you have a 1 gig line or a 10 gig line, you got to make sure that you're using less than 10% of it for your migration activity, right, or the data transfer activity.
Okay. Yeah, Vijay, hopefully that's answered. One more question. How often is cloud audit carried out for financial services? That it sounds, complex. So, how often? I think audit is pretty much a continuous process. It's just that, they, they tend to, obviously in the enterprise, you can imagine, there are a large number of business services, right? So, let me try and think. Is there a correct answer?
Let me start. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
There are different requirements for audit by different regulators and different regulations, right? So when we talk about financial industry, like we have audits at business levels, we have audits at project levels, we have audits at technology levels. So these audits are carried out to satisfy different regulatory requirements. I think SOX audit is the latest one, which needs like, that you conform all your change management requirements every 6 months, I think, every 6 months. But whereas like maintaining the audit logs in order to like perform these audits when required is an ongoing continuous basis. But like when you start off a new project or when you finish a major milestone, usually we tend to do an audit on that to ensure that all standards were adhered to as well. There are event-based audits and there are like time-based audits. So there are two kinds of audits that that take place. Most of the banks will have large audit teams. There will be technology audit teams that are audit teams which are specialized to look at technology and technology infrastructure. And there are business audits, which also look at technology, but they look at it from a business angle. So there are various dimensions to audit.
Yep. Thanks, Harsha.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Am I audible? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean to say there are going to be two levels of security assessment, right? One is you have your in-house team, and then the from cloud side. Hello. Yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat, Mauricio?
Security assessment is concerned, there are, I think, two levels of security assessment. One is from internal side, we have in-house team, and other is from the cloud service providers.
Yep. Okay, I think I know what you're saying. Yeah. So typically, the cloud service provider will not do an assessment of what the bank is deploying, right, or any other customer is deploying, right? They will do a security assessment of their own infrastructure and their own services.
The other side of it, these are hosted solutions, right? The cloud service
Right.
provider on other side, you are on this side, right? So
Uh-huh.
there must be some kind of assessment with respect to what infrastructure is being assigned to you.
Assigned to you. Okay. So, I mean, so typically, when you say kind of just trying to understand, right? So typically, if you look at a cloud provider, it's not like they carve out a certain set of physical servers and assign it to a customer. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. But the bank's security team does do a review of the services that are provided, by the cloud provider. So if you have a set of whatever 50, 60 odd services, right? The cloud providers team, and of course they hire external teams as well to do a security assessment of their service. But whenever an enterprise typically starts using a service, the bank's own security team will also do an independent assessment. They'll of course refer to the documentation that the cloud provider provides, or the security team that has external security team that has done a assessment of the cloud service provider, but they will form their own opinions, as to what this given service, what level of security does it provide, and therefore, what are the kinds of data and services that the bank can then host on that service provider. So it's like it's not done on a cloud provider level; it's done on a service by service level. So let's say there's virtual servers, there's managed databases, there's cloud storage, there is container platform, there is AIML platform. So really, the security team will assess each one of those independently, the bank's security service, and they will say, okay, on this service, this is the kind of security we have assessed it at, and therefore, this is the level of data and the criticality of service that can be deployed using this cloud service. So that's the kind of general model. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, you have a dedicated security team at Barclays, right?
Correct, absolutely.
Yeah, and how do you recruit them?
How do we what?
Recruitment of the security team.
I mean,
So it's this is a question very particular to Barclays. I would probably like not answer it from a Barclays perspective, prefer not to. Sir. In general, like there is a security community out there, So which has developed like from, back in the day, it just used to be physical security to like, very complex cyber security nowadays. Just like any other skill, security is a skill that is available in the market. And most enterprise hires from this community of security
Okay.
professionals.
One more question I would like to ask you. Do you consider cyber insurance in case of something happens?
Yeah. So there is different levels of protective actions that the bank takes. In general, any bank for that matter. One of them is like looking at insurance for all kinds of unintended or unplanned for events.
I think the simple from my side, I will just say I'm not aware of exactly what. And again, I don't know if the question is specific to Barclays or not. But yes, more generally speaking, yeah, cyber insurance is a thing. But yeah, I can't really say more than that.
They need to be considered or not to be considered? As far
I
as
think
look at the
everyone should consider it. Like it's like
consider.
any
Okay.
other unintended event, right? So
Okay.
it's like you don't plan to like have an unintended event, but it does tend to happen. So in order to protect yourself, like as an enterprise, you got to take all the different steps that is possible to do so. And one of them is taking out insurance. So if I were to be the CEO of an organization, I would definitely look at that.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Any other questions on the chat? No, I don't think so.
Check.
No, I think okay. I think we have gone through all of them.
Okay. Like, if there are no questions, do we have a break coming up?
I think so. But I guess yeah, we do have a break. But
Or should we continue on and wrap up the session?
let's say we have how much do we have? We have half an hour left, right? So I suggest let's skip the break if that's okay with everyone. About sir, is it okay if we skip this break because we do have some things to cover still.
Yeah. You can decide. Yeah. No problem.
Okay. I think then let's move on. Hopefully everyone can stay with us. Okay. Right. So the next section is titled Myths and Realities, and we're going to do this one a little differently as compared to the first few sessions. Hopefully it's a little less monotonous. Okay. Here we go. So the way we're going to do this is I will kind of pose the myth, and Harsha is going to try and knock it down. Yeah, and let's see if you again have any thoughts or questions. Just put them in the chat window. Okay, right. So what we have done is again with the previous case, we have tried to categorize all the myths we could think of. So it was a interesting exercise for us as well to think right, what are the common misconceptions, and we came up with a long list of them and we tried to address them, but we tried to then structure it into these categories. So you most of these you have seen before when we talked about considerations, but there's also cost, adoption, migration as well over here. Okay, let's dive into it. Okay, Harsha, so let's pick up the first one, which is all about control, which we talked a bit about, right? So one common I don't want to say misconception or one idea is that when we put infrastructure in the cloud, that I kind of give up control when I do that, and that if I have on-prem infrastructure, then I have a lot more control over it. So what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, today you go to any vendor, any public cloud vendor, the amount of fine-grained controls they hand over to you is enormous, right? Right from like what spec machine you need to like when it's running, when it's shut down, when it is patched. All of that is still under your control, right? So just because you put it in a cloud, it doesn't mean that you're giving up any more control than you have to. If you are an enterprise and you're running in-house infrastructure, most likely that infrastructure is running in a data center, and most likely the data center is outsourced to a data center provider as well. And if you want like a new server to be racked, like, you physically need somebody to go out there and get it racked, right? In fact, like if we need one of our servers in our own data center to reboot it, it's much more painful than for me to like reboot the server on cloud today. So I would almost argue that I have got more control as an application developer, as a technologist today, and on infrastructure running on cloud than on my own or our own premises.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that is the key point what you said at the end, Harsha, that the control now, in a sense, has moved from teams of infrastructure engineers, some of whom are uh, with you, some of whom are third party, into the hands of the application developers and the run the bank teams. That is really different. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is
Okay.
definitely a myth that if you're losing any control or you don't have absolute control of your infrastructure.
Correct.
In
Correct.
fact,
So I think.
like, the cloud provider doesn't have, like, I wanted to comment when you were talking about the audits. The cloud providers do not have access to the data that you put on their cloud, right?
Yeah.
So we were having this big conversation with one of our vendors, and the vendor absolutely said that like they have zero visibility on the data that we put in there. They have no control of our keys, right? Even though it stays on their infrastructure, they don't get access to it.
Yeah.
In fact, all that access lies with us. We keep full control.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Uh, let's move on to the next one. So this is about costs, and I think you did briefly mention this when we talked about migration strategy, but what it looks like is if I were to take the like for like migration, which I think on that graph was marked as rehosting or lift and shift, it looks like the quickest and cheapest way to do to move to the cloud. Is that right?
Yes and no, right? So your migration cost, yes, is the lowest if you do lift and shift. However, your run cost tends to be a lot more expensive if you do lift and shift because you're not making use of the features of the cloud, right? So one of the biggest advantages going to cloud is the ability to pay for what you use. If you don't make use of it, and your like for like migration, most likely today, because you on your infrastructure, it doesn't matter whether it's running, not running, to keep it on. Always on is the mode on on-prem infrastructure. If you kind of take that and lift and shift into the cloud, very quickly it becomes like very expensive, and you'll get like a heart attack when you see the bill. So yeah, yes, it's the quickest and the shortest path and the cheapest path to migration, but you need to think about the monthly bill or the daily bill that you get from your cloud provider, because it's all minute-based, hour-based usage. So run cost will be a lot higher when it comes to when you do lift and shift.
Right, absolutely. And I think, yeah. So, kind of related to that, costs question is that, a server, or if you want to buy a stack of CPUs from Intel, that kind of infrastructure, generally speaking, with some variation, it generally costs the same. So, how can it be that it is cheaper for, me to use it via the cloud provider as opposed to just buying it and using it myself?
Yeah, it's like buy it once and use forever, right?
Right, right.
I think we talked about a couple of things. Yeah, there are a couple of important points here. Right? So one is, if you buy something, it becomes obsolete. You need to replace it. You got to maintain it, manage it. Right? That tends to be expensive. The most important thing is scale. Right? You'll never reach the scale of a public cloud provider. Right? And so the unit cost tends to be, yes, as you said, comprised of hardware that you buy, but a large part of this unit cost tends to be the management of that particular hardware, right? The army of network people, infrastructure people that you need in order to like manage and maintain. So when you have, I think I'll take an analogy here, right? So I think I heard this analogy somewhere some time ago, right? If you want water to drink or water to like run your washing machine or to clean your utensils, yes, you can dig your own well. Yeah, absolutely. Once you dig your well, you get like water for life and maybe for the next 3 generations. But equally, you need to manage it, maintain it. You need to have a filtering system in place. You need to make sure that no dirty water gets into your well. All of these costs are hidden costs, right? You don't see it at day one. However, like you take the scale of a municipality which runs water for the entire city, so their ability to like adopt new technology to whether to clean the water, filter the water, you can never manage, right? So you just like open the tap and pay for what you use. So you don't have to dig a well in order to like to drink the water. So that scale is what makes it cheaper for the cloud provider. And as you said, it's not just the upfront costs, but also the maintenance costs and the management costs and the management of the infrastructure. You need SMEs, subject matter experts, who are expensive, right, to have keep on your payroll. Whereas, like for a public cloud provider, the same SME is servicing through automation, is servicing hundreds of thousands of customers. So
Yep.
his per hour wage is divided across all these different clients. That's how cloud providers are able to like provide best-in-class service at scale at a very affordable price.
Right. And the other thing is also that, when a enterprise typically buys hardware, it buys from, someone like a Dell or a HP or an IBM, right? Whereas some of the more advanced cloud providers, they are no longer going through these traditional hardware vendors, right? They have their own custom designs and they bulk manufacture them with third parties and, deploy them. So again, they kind of shave off some of the costs over there as well. And in fact, they are buying in such large quantities that they are able to go to someone like an Intel or AMD and acquire them at pretty much the same or lesser cost than some of these big name vendors.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe coming to the third one then. So does that mean that that when I'm using the cloud, so that there is no admin overhead? Everything is managed for me, maintained for me, run by me, by the cloud provider. So there should be no admin overhead, right?
Yes, like you kind of trade one for the other, right? Like so, you kind of reduce your admin overhead, but you kind of invest the same in automation. Right? You want to be still in control of, as we talked about a few sections before. You want to be in control. You want to make sure that like you are running what you want to run when you want to run. So what all that translates into automation costs. So there is investment to be more efficient, if you can think about it. There isn't an ongoing admin cost. You kind of like trade that for investing into like being more efficient. So yeah.
Great. Yep. I think okay. So let's talk about ease of adoption and migration, right? So when I first started, using or looking at one of the providers, they have these quick start guides, right? So it makes it look like it's very easy, right? I just need to click a few buttons and my server's up and running. I SSH in and deploy stuff. It all seems so. It's very easy to start using, right? Is that true when we're talking in a organizational context?
Yeah, I was just like laughing because like I still remember like getting these bills on my credit card. So like I signed up for a free tier, right? When I first started dabbling. Now, of course, like I looked at all these exciting things, tried it out, started it out. In fact, I remembered that if you don't shut down, you pay for it, right? I thought I had shut down everything. So guess what? Some of the services restart by themselves. That was a real gotcha, right? Especially RDS on Amazon. you shut it down within a week or two, it will restart. So you have to not only shut it down, but I mean, if you don't plan to use it,
Terminate it.
you have to
Yeah.
delete that particular.
Correct. Correct.
So yeah, you got to be careful with this one. Yes, it's absolutely true, right? Like getting started off is very easy, especially for I keep saying fintech, a startup, right? Um, where you want to quickly experiment, where you quickly want to try out something. But enterprise technology is a different ballgame, right? You got to have standards in place. You got to adhere to regulations. You have to make sure that you pass audits, and all of that requires a certain base minimum of automation, a certain base minimum of how should I say, controls to be put in place. In order to do that, there will be a certain amount of investment and certain amount of effort that will be required for the enterprise to get into that. Equally, like, it's a cultural change, a cultural mind shift change from an organization's point of view, right? It needs to move away from the thought process that, like, when I'm starting a new project, like most developers, what they do is like try and grab the biggest box available, right? On-prem, that's what we've done for, like, God knows, like throughout our careers. And that's what we are incentivized for, because our application needs to run smoothly. That's what my business cares about, right? However, when you go to cloud, that particular bill for that biggest box that you grabbed comes directly to your business. So you got to be careful of that. And if you don't need it, you should not be like grabbing the biggest box. In fact, like, you should be starting with the smallest minimum viable product, as we call it, like in our business sense. Right? Like, what is the smallest unit that you need in order to start off, and you scale from there. That's the cultural shift. That's another one that you need across your organization.
Right. And how about skilling? I mean, it's quite easy to pick it up, but I think within the organization, it's not just the developers who need to understand cloud, right? It is a whole host of other people who work in technology and in business who need some level of awareness to make sure that we're doing things the right way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think, I think you touched on it, was leveraging, right kind of DevOps. So something as simple as, having a high level of test automation, right? It just makes it easier. So when we talk about, say, evergreening, right? One of the key things is that once you have done a platform or infra upgrade, to kind of recertify and prove that, yes, this, your application continues to work. The thing is, you haven't really got a very robust, automated testing mechanism. It may well turn out that your evergreening process is as slow as it ever was, because while the cloud provider lets you quickly upgrade the underlying OS and all of that, your certification process, on the new
Hello,
hardware that you must.
hello.
Hello, yes.
Can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
Sorry to
Yes, yes.
interrupt you. I have one question.
Yep.
Yeah, it is related with the security. So there are so many cryptographic algorithms are there. So AES is how are the AES stands, and which is the better cryptographic algorithm in terms of cloud? Second question is talking about the cloud forensics. What is the level of research which can be possible, or how many level of research is going on in this area?
Okay. So I will say cloud forensics. Unfortunately, I don't know much about, so I won't be able to answer your question. And the other question was which algorithms do you say?
Yes, cryptography. In terms of security, there are so many security parameters are there. So
Correct,
based
correct.
on the different security parameters, which algorithm, cryptographic algorithm is better? Which is better?
I don't think there's any one size fits all. And obviously, I'm not going to specifically list which algorithms and key lengths Barclays recommends. But I would say one good starting point, as I think I mentioned, is to look at the NIST standards and see what they recommend in terms of usage of encryption for data in transit, data at rest. Yeah, unfortunately, but the forensics part, I can't answer. I don't know if Harsha, if you have
If you
any.
talk about in terms of the data storage as well as the
Uh-huh.
data when it is during the transmission.
Yes, yes.
So what I heard is it is AES is at least somehow better. It performs better. AES
Right.
256 or 5.
Yeah.
So is there any algorithm that you heard about or you have came to know
No,
or
as
you
I,
have worked on that?
no. So usually, we just look at what NIST advises, and we look at whether the cloud. So I think the key thing, as I said earlier, is we don't try to roll our own encryption standard or implementation, right? We tend to use what is a certified standard and certified implementations of it. For example, you have the FIPS certification standard for implementations. So I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but yeah, unfortunately, that's the best I can do. Uh, I don't know, Harsha, anything that you're aware of on the forensic side?
No, I'm not actually, to be honest. We can definitely take this one of these questions away and see if there is any answer to that. But
Okay,
Sure.
sir.
I'm
Thank
not
you.
aware of
Thank
it. Yeah.
Okay. Um, where were we?
So you
Right,
just
right. Yeah, let's move on to migrating. I think so. This was the other one that it's very easy to migrate your workloads to the public cloud or between multiple cloud providers. So Asha, I think you would like to say on that in terms of
yeah,
how
yeah,
easy it
yeah,
should be.
absolutely. So, migration of anything that is legacy is never easy. Let me start by saying that, right? But having said that, there are tools which make things easier to migrate, so to say, especially when you want to move from one database layer to another database layer. Right? So there are cloud specific, cloud vendor specific tools made available, but there will be data migration service from Amazon or some of the other tools. Cross cloud is another ball game again, right? This is not a solved problem. The portability across different clouds
Yep.
is an unsolved problem at this time. However, there are new vendors coming about, like IBM is championing themselves as a hybrid cloud provider platform. Right? In the past, there has always been a incentive for the cloud providers to keep the clients with them and not support hybrid cloud. However, the world is changing today, right? Customers like enterprise customers are big enough to demand for their resilience needs or for whatever other reasons that they want to be across different cloud providers and to abstract away from the specifics of each individual cloud provider. In certain sense, I think you refer to it, Shrikant, if your application is containerized, if you use something like an OpenShift on-prem, and you could easily probably migrate to an OpenShift platform on Amazon, or if you use Docker for that matter. But if you're using very proprietary software that is only provided by a particular cloud provider, you are locked in. And so it all depends on your implementation.
Yeah, yeah. I think that trade-off, that the more, I think the way the cloud providers work is, you have a lot of these managed services, which really make it very easy to use, and make it more cost efficient as well. But the flip side of that is they have the potential to create lock-in and therefore make it more difficult for you to move multi-cloud. Yeah. I think for different audiences, I think the it'll work differently. A startup might treat this differently as opposed to an enterprise, which has other requirements. They
Okay.
they may be more willing to have a situation where they're locked in. Yeah. Sorry, you were saying.
No, there was a question on what DevOps tools are available financial. I don't think there's anything specific for financial as such, but Like if you look at the DevOps tools today, like break it up in CI/CD, automating your CI/CD pipeline, right, is the key thing.
Hmm.
Deployment-wise, like we can split it into two types of deployments, right? Deployment with infrastructure, right? So most cloud providers provide you infrastructure as code. So Terraform is generally used for
Terraform.
code, and it's not specific to a particular cloud provider. If you go to Amazon, like you have CloudFormation, the CloudFormation will not necessarily work on, in fact, will not work on other cloud providers other than Amazon. Right? So it's a specific offering from Amazon, whereas Terraform generally tends to work across the board. And the other part to deployment is application deployment, right? Application deployment, again, like there are different tools that one can use. Generally, Chef is commonly used to deploy both application software as well as like other supporting software, like whether it be Java, JDK, operating systems, and
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
equally, like there are lots of other softwares available for deployment as well. There isn't
Correct.
many. The key thing is to automate, right? You need to have continuous integration and continuous deployment.
Yeah.
When it comes to like integration, I guess like people tend to use GitHub, Nexus, and TeamCity or Jenkins, right? That's the common set of tools. Is there anything that you think to add there?
No, you're right. I think most of the DevOps tooling, without getting into exactly what Barclays uses, generally speaking, we use the same kind of tools that have currency and skill availability in the industry. There are some testing tools, I would say, that are specific to certain financial services verticals, but I don't think it's worthwhile really getting into them, because they have very niche corner cases. There is a certain kind of payment system testing automation tool. I Yeah, I don't think it's really important we get into that kind of detail.
Yeah, you're right. Test automation is another key area, right? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. Just time wise, we need to speed up, I think. Okay. Let's see. We have to. Okay, we'll have to go a bit faster. We only have 9 minutes here. So on security, Harsha, so there is a perception that cloud is less secure. That if I put any data in the cloud, in this kind of shared infrastructure environment, that there's a higher possibility of data leakage. So, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the world has changed when it comes to security, right? Gone are the days like 15 years ago, 16 years ago, when we hear of these, horror scenarios where data from one customer was made available to another. Today, security, like if you take physical security, for example, where like the data centers live for some of these cloud providers is completely kept secret. Nobody knows where these data centers are, even though data centers are not easy to like hide. They're massive buildings, but like they have managed to keep that secret, which goes to say like how seriously physical security is being taken, right? And the amount of security that the cloud providers are able to provide is hard to match for forget like startups, for small enterprises or even medium enterprises. And there are industry standards and certifications that all cloud providers like sign up to and offer. So you can be very secure that your data is highly secure. And even though there is shared infrastructure, all the cloud providers provide you private virtual networks. What that means is that your data and your infrastructure is ring fenced. Only you, not even the cloud provider, is able to see what data is being put onto those private networks. Let alone like another customer being able to snoop into what is there in your ring-fenced infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think then, yeah, and I think we can just briefly mention certifications, which is way to say that there are third parties that also assess cloud providers against these certifications. So that is another data point that you can use. Don't just need to rely on what the cloud provider says. And also, it's important to understand, this shared responsibility model, as it's sometimes called, which is to say that the cloud providers gives you a certain set of assurances in terms of how their services and infrastructure will work and will be secure. But it is also your responsibility on top of that when you deploy or use those services to configure them appropriately, right? And I think the canonical example for that really is where you have an object storage, like an S3 bucket that is made publicly accessible, and suddenly, confidential data is available over the internet, right? Now, the thing is, these object storage tools obviously have controls to say that, make the data encrypted, do not serve it out over the public internet. It's just that when, an organization chooses to use these, it needs to be really careful to understand these controls and, choose the right configuration. Of course, the cloud providers are also changing now, so if you go into AWS, for example, when you create a new S3 bucket, by default, it is not available to public, it is only accessible within your account. And, you really need to go out of your way to make that bucket, to configure it, to make it publicly accessible. But, so I think long and short is there is capability, but there is also an expectation that, as a customer, you would use it in a responsible manner. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Sure. Just running out of time, unfortunately. Yeah.
There is a
Okay.
question on certification costs. Look, I think I would say that yes, it's a cost, but it's built into the business of doing business, right? Built into the cost of doing business, rather. So without
Absolutely.
going into much details of like how much this costs, it is something like GDPR is a large project across the bank, and it is significant.
Yeah. And really, if you see, what we are talking about is the cloud provider certifying its own services, and that is obviously they do it at scale, and you don't as a customer need to bear the cost of that, so if that I think that's the point to make there. Okay, let's roll on to resilience. So I think in the news you do hear a lot about, there was this particular service that went down, and as a result, Instagram is down, and this and that. I think the last case or the canonical case is a CDN going down, and you certainly have half the general services down. So, do cloud services actually create or cause more frequent outages? If you start using them.
Yeah, they certainly make the headlines. So what happens is like when there's an outage in the enterprise, unless it's a customer-facing outage, like, suppose if Lloyd's ATM goes down like it did like a few months ago or a year ago, I think it makes headlines. Otherwise, like if something goes internally down in the markets area or some other businesses, we don't get to hear. Whereas in the cloud space, public cloud space, doesn't matter which service, whatever small glitch that happens, if it happens, it's impacting a lot more customers, right? And their customers, in fact, and hence it tends to make public news, and it tends to make the national headlines. So that's why it's like a magnifying effect, right? So it feels like there is a lot more issues with public cloud than in the enterprise. But in reality, you don't hear of the thousands and hundreds of thousands of service outages that happen within the enterprises.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing is that if the cloud services are so highly resilient, then do I need to really worry about business continuity, right? Amazon is going to take care of everything that happens, right?
So, like very simply put, Amazon gives you options. You can choose to use those options to make your application resilient, and it makes it easy to make your application resilient because of these options. So, very good example is like when you have a SQL server, by the press of a button, you can say that in Amazon or AWS that you want a read replica. That means, that means that like whatever you do in your database, getting it somewhere else. You don't have to set it up. You don't have to put it there. But if you choose not to, and if something goes wrong with your database, it's as vulnerable as a database running on your own premises, right? So
Absolutely.
it's up to you to make sure that your application is getting it.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. Let's move on. I'm sorry, but yeah,
Yeah.
we're running out of time. So I think this one is about the cloud being the ideal place to store and process large amounts of data. Any caveats that go with that?
Yeah, in generally, like that's true. I mean, when you have large amounts of data to be processed very quickly, and you want large amounts of compute power to churn through that data, uh, cloud tends to be a good place to go for. However, if you have latency requirements, where we are into small latency requirements, especially in the execution space, like we are talking microseconds execution, there cloud is not the right place for that. So you got to look at what your scenario is, what your use case is, and see if it makes sense.
Yep. Great.
And last, and the cost of getting data out, as I think I mentioned earlier, there is a cost to it. Most public cloud providers don't charge you for putting data in; they'll charge you for putting data out. And you still need to make money at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And just rounding out,
Right.
we're out of time. Scalability. So I think there's the conception that cloud service capacity is unlimited, for all practical purposes.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I
what
would
have
say
we
it's
seen in
constrained
that?
only by costs, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you can scale to an unlimited, I mean, within the constraints of imagination, right, and of the business. Right? But you will get a very large bill equivalent to that. So you need to be cognizant of that. However, like when you talk about enterprise setups, the enterprise also wants to put like limits, whether it be hard limits or soft limits, on the amount of infrastructure that you can connect, mainly to protect the organization from these large bills, unpleasant bills.
No, thanks, Ashan. I think we are just at time. So if
Okay,
you don't mind, I'll just flip over to the next slide and let's. Do you want to go through these and then we'll have a quick Q&A at the end?
sure. Let me just quickly run through, right? Key
Yep.
enablers. So in order to get to a efficient, to make your cloud journey more efficient, a couple of things that you definitely need to take care of. One, as I was telling you, right, like you need to look at automation. If you don't automate all the things that you do manually today, you'll end up doing in one way or form manually on cloud. So your cloud journey and cloud operations will be inefficient. So you got to look at like automation of your build environment, making use of code, right? Automated deployment, and the automated testing. These are some of the automations that you need to consider. The other thing is community-based practice, right? What I mean by that is cloud journey is a hard and long journey for most people. It's a lot of new learning. So you've got to make sure that you create communities which can leverage from each other. You invent once, you learn once, and you spread that knowledge, right? Kind of goes hand in hand with education and outreach, right? Like no cloud migration is a technology only project. Bring people along, right? Bring your businesses along, bring your control functions along, right? Everyone needs to be brought into this idea of cloud. It's a mindset change. Okay. So the last question that I wanted to cover was if you're coming in new to cloud, it's not unsurmountable. Right? There are lots of courses available, free courses available, Coursera, Udemy, everyone provides free courses or at a minimal cost. Right? So sign up for any of them. I don't think one is better than the other. Right? And the most important thing is like learning by doing, right? Most of the cloud providers give you free tiers. You can sign up for them and start dabbling. Just start doing it. That's pretty much like what I wanted to say about what next steps you should be taking, right? So let's go to Q&A. If there are any questions that anybody wants to raise.
Sure. Right. Let me just scroll down. Okay, I think Yogesh had a question on cloud forensics and algorithms. I think we touched on that. Sorry.
I think we covered all of that.
Yeah. A lot of customers are looking for a decentralized system when it comes to cloud, where the data of many organizations are stored in one place. Wouldn't that be counterintuitive? Okay, interesting question.
Okay, let me take a stab at it.
Yeah.
So the way the cloud providers like spread their risk is by having multiple data centers, right? So not all the data goes into one data center. So if you think about it at a very high level, they have offerings in different continents, and when it comes to countries, they have offerings in different countries, and when it comes to countries, they have offerings within different regions, and within regions like they have multiple data centers within a few miles of each other. The reason why they can't put it too far away is because of latency. So whatever is happening in one data center, like they try and normally replicate into another data center. So if this one goes down, they're still able to provide via I think Amazon says that within every region they have like at least 3 data centers. It used to be 2, now it's going up to 3. Right? So
At
they kind
least, yeah.
of reduce the risk by doing all these kind of things. Imagine if you were to do this yourself, how expensive that was going to be. And in fact, like an organization like Barclays or a Lloyd's or a HSBC or a Morgan Stanley we still do, and we did in the past have that. You can think of any region and location. We used to have data centers in all of them, and 3 or 4 of them. Right? So it's just that the cost is getting reduced for us. It's going from one place to another.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that not all data is stored in one place. There are multiple cloud providers, but it also depends on whichever service you're using to leverage those features correctly. We have come across services where even though only one of the availability zones in region went down, the service stopped working because it was not well designed. So that is okay. Let's go on. What are DevOps tools for financial service? Okay, I think we've done this. What are the certification costs? We did that. And I think, okay, Manish. But it is still centralized, as in all the data centers are controlled by the same parent provider. Cloud provider. So that is not entirely true, right? Okay,
I mean,
unless you're saying that, within,
yeah, it is right. Like
sorry,
so, I think Manish's point is, what if Amazon goes down?
yeah,
Right, Amazon goes bankrupt. So within Amazon, we talked about like there are regions within regions, there are multiple data centers. That's how Amazon manages it. Right? If Manish's question is like, what if Amazon as a provider disappears or goes down? What then? Right.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
think that is where the whole concept of hybrid cloud and multi-cloud is coming up, where certain businesses, certain industries are being challenged to say, like, show us your resiliency plans, show us your business continuity plans by regulators, right? So for each of the things, like I can tell from my own experience, for each of the things that we do on cloud, we also need to provide a plan to say, in case that particular vendor is not available or that service is not available, what is our business continuity plan? We do that level of planning.
correct. And again, it depends on the criticality of the service as well. That there are some services where we would go to that extent and the cost to get that kind of resiliency, and there are some other services which even within a bank which are not that important, and where we would not think of multi-cloud. So that is another thing to look at. Yeah.
And how the cloud providers themselves decentralize the infrastructure is by putting it across multiple data centers.
Correct. I think the one failure point that we have seen, although not very often, is that where the cloud provider has a control, uh, let's call it a control plane or a control infrastructure that handles the behind the scenes control of services in a region, and when that control tier fails, sometimes you do get cascading failures of that service across all availability zones in a given region. That is a very rare event, but it has happened um, at least once that we are aware of. But in that case, the answer is that you need to use multi-cloud if your service is such that it needs a resiliency that is more than that 5 nines or 6 nines that can be provided by one region with 3 data centers in it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. If there are no more questions,
I think so. We are 8 minutes over schedule, so
Okay, let's
we
quickly
should.
wrap up. Closing comments from me, mainly around. Hope you guys have seen the size of the cloud opportunity, right? As I started off by saying, there are probably a couple of 100,000 jobs out there from a career point of view, right? Like, given most of the audience here are students, I think that's a key aspect. Like, that's where you're looking at if you're looking to build a career. A couple of 100,000 jobs today, but equally only probably about 20% of enterprise on cloud. So the opportunity is enormous. Hopefully, this has given you enough insight and got you excited to at least sign up for a trial cloud account from one of the providers. Doesn't matter which one, and get you started. Good luck with your cloud journey. Sripat?
Though nothing else, I think it was interesting session, and we had some interesting questions. Ambade sir, maybe we'll hand back to you for any closing remarks. Thank you.
Hello,
Yeah,
Ambade
not
sir.
that. Hello. Yeah. Hello. Yeah,
Ambade sir,
Sunil.
just one
Yes.
second before you conclude. So I would like to request all the participants if you could turn on your camera for 3 seconds, so we can take some photos for such a wonderful session given by Harsha sir and Srikanth. Could you please turn on the camera? We can take a memory of this particular session. Excellent session. Shifa sir, could you stop sharing the screen?
Oh yeah, sorry, sir. Yeah, one second.
Yes, please. It's my kind request to all the participants. Could you please turn on the camera so that we can take this of this session? Ambade sir,
Yes.
is it like participants are available on the screen?
1 minute. I can. See. 1 minute. Yeah, not all of them have turned on the camera.
Hello,
Okay,
dear
sir.
participants. Could you please turn on the camera for a few seconds so that we can take some pics of
Photograph.
this wonderful session? Ambade sir, shall we please, sir?
Maybe the next time around you should do it at the beginning of the
Yeah.
session.
Good.
Ambade sir, over to
Okay.
you. You can
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
let me
Harsha.
share the screen.
Thank you, Sripat, for such a wonderful, informative, and insightful session. I can definitely tell you I have been benefited from this session personally, so as others. Uh, I would like to, Sunil sir, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, please kindly present a moment as a token of appreciation to Harsha Yale. Sir, kindly accept our memento, virtual memento.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure.
I request Sripad to kindly accept our virtual memento as a
Thank you very much. It was a great experience, I should say. Thank you.
Ambade sir, shall I stop sharing?
Yeah, no, let me thank. Okay, it is indeed honor to give vote of thanks on behalf of ICT 21 and the organizing committee of tutorial we would like to thank Barclay. I would like to express our deep gratitude to our guest speakers Akshay Yale and Sripal Shukla for sharing a rich experience of cloud adoption, migration strategies, consideration, and opportunities in cloud, security requirements in the cloud, portabilities, scalabilities, and so on and so forth. It was a really wonderful session. How to adopt the cloud for the organization. It's a strategic decision. So it's really going to help us. And so I would like to take this opportunity to even thank all the participants. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you all. Thank you all once again. And looking forward to you meet in the next conference in personally. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Sure,
much.
sure. Thank you, Shipas sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you. Bye.
Sunil.
Yes, sir.